Chapter 921. Delightful Carnage. Northern paused, drinking in the scene before him for several heartbeats. He liked it. Maniacal as that might sound, he couldn't deny the truth. The twisted beauty of what lay before him stirred something dark within. Northern stared, mesmerized, for a dozen seconds before muttering under his breath. So, this is what I can do when I don't depend on chaos and void. The reach of his abilities stretched only as far as his imagination. A vast territory he'd barely explored because he'd never needed to. Chaos and void had been such flawless weapons that everything crumbled before them. Northern had instinctively relegated his other talents to mere support beams for these powers, when it should have been the other way around. Now, thrust into a position where chaos and void threatened to consume him faster than his enemies, Northern discovered the raw beauty of his talents when pushed to their limits. He etched this scene into his memory. This would be the foundation of a new path, one free from chaos or void. This could be his key to fighting through whatever Khal was planning. He'd be a fool to think this was Khal's entire scheme. That bastard never stopped halfway, always plotting something darker, something worse. Northern knew he needed his own contingencies. Starting now, the Night Terror helm folded back with swift precision, leaving only the small devilish horns crowning his head. Northern's olive face bore the marks of battle. Despite being hidden behind the helm, his skin appeared battered, like weathered leather stretched too thin. He swung illusioned Hefter in a wide arc, slashing through the monster blocking his path. Blood sprayed like purple rain, painting the air around him. Then, muscles coiling like a spring, he launched himself skyward. He soared over the sea of monsters, cutting through the boundary of shadow before landing beyond the tangle of corpses. Even the creatures outside Eclipsing Dread's reach hadn't escaped, all slaughtered by the vicious ice that spread like hungry fingers across the ground. This had been intentional. Northern had planned to use the strange shadow as a conduit for one of Frostheart's abilities, Frigid Nova, triggering an explosion of ice spikes. But when he wove the talent into Eclipsing Dread, he sensed something more powerful stirring. Something that whispered of total annihilation. That's why he'd extended the first tendril of ice outward and used it as a prototype. Eclipsing Dread was a shadow that obeyed its own laws. Within its boundaries, Northern commanded absolute control. At its core, these laws were woven around a single thread: dread. He couldn't bend the shadow to purposes of joy or comfort. Such manipulation went against its very nature. Facing an enemy that thrived in darkness was bound to be a grueling battle, like fighting water while drowning. But Northern had more weapons in his arsenal than just shadows. The unique properties of Eclipsing Dread allowed him to chain Frigid Nova endlessly, casting the same devastating ability over and over in mere heartbeats. Ice spikes erupted from the ground like teeth from a frozen beast, tearing through the horde until the overwhelming crowd of monsters lay still. His plan had worked perfectly, but at a steep price. His void essence drained rapidly, a reservoir running dry. Northern had solved this problem long ago, or so he thought. The bitter realization that his solution was merely temporary left a sour taste in his mouth. He craved an endless flow of essence. And technically, he had one. It just didn't pour directly into him, despite residing in his very soul. What a strange thing to say. He'd been forced to place a clone of himself inside his own soul, creating a crude pipeline that siphoned talent from the depths of his being into his physical form. A disturbing concept, he realized now, like performing surgery on yourself while remaining conscious. But these were the bizarre compromises that void and chaos demanded in exchange for their overwhelming strength. Sparing the beautiful carnage one last glance, Northern launched himself forward, cutting through the air like an arrow. The scattered monsters, hunched over the corpses they'd claimed, froze mid-feast and swiveled toward him. Immediately, all at once, as if responding to some silent command, they abandoned their grisly meals and charged toward Northern. He'd sensed them coming. With practiced precision, he extended his sword and watched as its blade slowly faded from sight. Armed with this invisible weapon, Northern carved a wide arc as the monsters closed in. Their purple blood painted the air in thick droplets as they crumpled before his unseen edge. Within moments, he joined the fray on the opposite side of the arena where his duplicate, the Molten Vein Northern, was still trapped within the enormous numbers of the enemy. In this form, Northern lacked the vast repertoire of talents his other self possessed. But what he did have was strength, titanic strength, and the support of his other self. With one Northern now freed from the crushing pressure of numbers, he felt capable of managing both forms simultaneously. His mind ached with the effort, the mental strain of controlling dual bodies more demanding than he'd anticipated. Sweat beaded on his brow as concentration threatened to slip from his grasp. But he had to contain this threat before it spilled into the city streets. More monsters would inevitably pour from the rift. He wasn't worried about those, though. Unless Variolania was catastrophically incompetent, reinforcements would already be rushing toward them. The kingdom boasted powerful drifters of its own. Their princes were formidable, their generals, many of them sages, were the stuff of legends he'd heard as a child. Most notable among them was the kingdom's only duke, a childhood friend of the king himself. They called him Prominent Leg. Northern suspected that was actually his true name. Though he'd never met the man, only seen his portrait, Prominent Leg had always been the first to arrive wherever danger threatened. He stood as the embodiment of heroism throughout the nation. If any of Variolania's powerful figures were to appear, it would be him. Regardless, soldiers would arrive soon enough. The situation would become manageable. And if that didn't happen, well, all the best for Variolania. They would have to find their own way to protect the blood-soaked streets of their nation. Chapter 922. The Truth About Chaos Art. As control and balance slipped back into Northern's hands, the enigmatic heroic paladin began to move again, like he had merely finished a brief rest. His V-shaped slit visor flickered back to life with the glow of heat that seemed to radiate from the depths of a volcano. Then he raised one leg. The movement was ordinary, unremarkable, giving no hint of what was to come. But when he slammed the raised foot into the ground, the world shook. A seismic wave ripped out from the center and traveled with terrifying force, hurling all the monsters, desperate for a taste of his flesh, backward into the air. All of them flew away, helpless against a power they couldn't hope to withstand. In this moment, the enigmatic paragon seized his advantage, pressing forward with relentless purpose. He blurred as he shot toward the airborne monsters. Time seemed to crawl, with the enigmatic paragon moving like a streak of black ink and dancing flames against the frozen backdrop. His hands lashed out and crushed one monster, the impact unleashing a shockwave that sent the poor creature rocketing across the sky, colliding with several others and dragging them along in its violent path. They were all still falling, but before they could gather their wits, the enigmatic paragon was already upon them. The raw might behind each blow contradicted the slender grace of his form. Despite his thick, jagged armor, such power suggested a more massive, hulking physique. This disconnect made it impossible for onlookers to comprehend the true nature of his existence. He had to be a paragon. There was no other explanation. An enigmatic one. A hero. It was quite sad that Titan's Wrath abilities were basically two categories, one of which reinforced him with thunderous strength and the other crushing his environment. These two categories, however, have been more than enough for him for a while now. They were also bound to receive a major boost the moment he became an Ascendant, possibly a Paragon too. A real one. Northern also had to consider the scale of damage before he unleashed each attack. Earthbreaker, for example, was an ability that could shatter the entire landscape of the arena and overturn everything. He could trust the Citadel representatives to protect themselves, but he couldn't say the same about the instructors or the rest of the good-hearted folks fighting desperately. So he used it with caution. He could also not afford to be careless with Essence the way he usually was, and he had to hold out a bit more until reinforcement came. Luckily, he had two of himself to depend on, so maybe things weren't that bad. They never were for him. It was just the others he had always been worried about. The enigmatic Paragon clicked his tongue irritably behind his helm. Since when did I start caring about people? He rushed forward with even more frightening force, raising the hammer effortlessly with one hand and smashing it into the ground. The entire place tore violently apart. Massive chunks of stone exploded outward, but before they could fly beyond his reach, his hammer had already whistled through the air and swung back just in time to shatter the largest debris, as if he had planned it all along. Lightning crackled and sank into the stone like veins of corruption forcing their way in. It all happened in slow motion, seemingly, but the sequence was actually blindingly fast, too quick for naked eyes to follow. The stone fractured with merciless threads of lightning that danced outward, latching onto several monsters like hungry, electric tendrils. The lightning sparked and writhed feverishly as the enigmatic Paragon, in one smooth flow of attack, raised the hammer again and brought it thundering down. The moment impact resounded, monsters were ripped to shreds. Purple blood fountained into the air and rained down on everything and everyone. The display drew several gasps. Many had even paused their battles to witness the terrible beauty of this slaughter. The enigmatic Paragon was gruesome, yes, but his gruesomeness carried both art and creativity. Perhaps he was built more for canvas than for battle. Yet beautifully he had transformed battle into a sort of canvas personalized for the viciousness of his hammer. But elsewhere on the battlefield, another merciless and creative slaughter was unfolding, albeit with a different style. The student moved with a dual trail of ice and fire. Wicked, immolating flames encircled him like a living cloak and lashed out with every movement, devouring monsters as if possessed by hunger. From the soles of his feet, spears of ice shot forth, impaling monsters in an instant. Behind him, a sinuous shadow slithered perpetually from monster to monster. Each time the shadow pooled beneath a creature, the beast froze in place, and a heartbeat later began to tremble violently. The core purpose of Eclipsing Dread was to deliver exactly that dread. Channeled through the terrifying medium of void essence, this talent's ability to shatter monsters' minds before Northern even reached them could never be overstated. In fact, Northern could pinpoint this as one of the primary reasons why the battle had become so manageable and seemingly easy. Although many might not share his perspective, as his definition of easy was quite relative. Not many would align with his standards. But he was enjoying himself quite well. His sword sang feverishly as it harvested heads wherever it struck. The creature's scaled skin was tough, but not tough enough to withstand a legendary item. And the battle, viewed from two perspectives, was doing something more. Northern felt as though something like droplets of essence was slowly pooling into his soul. The more he moved, the more these droplets accumulated. As long as he and his other self continued to fight, the foundation of something profound seemed to be gathering drop by drop, waiting to form a vast ocean. As to when that would happen, not even he knew. Of course, he first needed to understand what was actually happening. But Northern already had an inkling. It had to do with the twin abilities of Omniform. Demon of Change gave him a doorway to a state of perpetual transformation, while Demon of Emulation was that doorway incarnate. When he observed things long enough, he could peer into their essence, understand them in unusual ways. This mostly worked with battle arts, but in this conflict, a subtle shift was occurring. Observing the fight from two different perspectives caused Northern, for the first time in ages, to truly notice the combat arts of monsters. He wouldn't be foolish enough to deny that monsters possessed battle arts. He had learned from one himself. But Northern had long abandoned the teachings of Night Terror and had embraced the pathway of chaos instead. What was happening to him now was a reorganization, a restatement of his true essence. The more he used Omniform to comprehend the true nature of these monsters' battle techniques, the more he felt the veil over his own essence dissolving like morning mist. Such that Northern found himself questioning, as he flowed from one monster to another, leaving a wake of severed limbs and spraying blood. He had always thought chaos art was what he needed, but witnessing how the monsters wrought chaos through their madness and frenzy, Northern couldn't help but question the very nature of his battle art. Of course, his own chaos was more refined and controlled. With chaos eyes, he could harness the environment, even time itself, to create pockets of disorder for him to exploit. But even before, and certainly now, he had always walked a razor's edge with chaos, making that precarious balance the very essence of his battle art. And in all honesty, the progress of that battle art had stagnated for some time. Northern was now grasping the nature of chaos better through dual consciousness, pondering what he observed through both perspectives. His battle style remained chaos art even as the enigmatic paragon. It was simply rewoven to embrace the weapon he wielded, and surprisingly, proved even more devastating with the hammer than with the sleek silvery sword. Of course, thinking with both was a peculiar concept because it remained the same mind. Omniform merely helped him split it in two. He was essentially contemplating the same question from different angles, one perspective examining chaos art through the swift, precise sword, forecasting his art's evolution by studying the savage fury with which the monsters attacked. The other perspective viewed chaos art through the lens of the crushing hammer and titanic strength, likewise predicting his art's future by analyzing the same brutal frenzy that drove the monsters forward. And both approaches were triggering a monumental breakthrough that Northern had never dreamed possible. Which was why, as the battle raged on, he was already beginning to realize that chaos art was a battle style he never should have embraced, because at the end of that path lay only one destination: madness. Northern's brow furrowed behind Molten Vein's helm as the realization crystallized within him. Stupid. What were you expecting? That was sort of what the whole emphasis of chaos had been since the beginning. There was only a finite amount of time he could stubbornly balance on the edge. If he sought growth, he had to move a step closer toward madness. Like Kahl, for example. But Northern knew better than that. Madness and chaos or void, those weren't his true nature. He was a copycat, a formless, nameless soul, whose very existence was to mirror and emulate any and everything. Damn! So Northern began a disassembling. Chapter 923, Terrifying Power. Northern was well aware that unraveling chaos art would take more than just a few battles. Unlearning proved harder than learning, a gruesome process for the mind, or perhaps people simply overstated it. Either way, he was about to find out. The first thing he had to do was debunk everything he had learned of chaos art, starting from the very footstep. A subtle change rippled through Northern as he altered his movement in battle. His focus shifted from exploiting disorder to mirroring the frenzy of the monsters charging before him. His style suddenly grew more chaotic. Anyone watching who understood his intentions would think he was doing the complete opposite of what he aimed to achieve. Yet Northern strangely found these adjustments easy to draw out, first in his mind, then even more so in his actions. Perhaps the battle intelligence he'd gained from formless intertwining with chaos art was what made the transition almost natural. But all of that meant nothing. Whether his intelligence made battle adaptations easy or sparked creativity in the art of combat, Northern didn't care. Chaos art had to go. It would be a long, grueling process, but it began with a single step. A step he took as he abruptly shoved one foot forward and lashed out with his sword, bringing it down in one cruel overhead strike that cleaved through the creature's head. The blade lodged somewhere within the skull, but Northern's legs didn't stop. His armored boot smashed upward from below as he simultaneously yanked free the invisible sword and plunged it through the monster's gaping mouth. Another beast crashed into his side, but void force shimmered around him like invisible armor. He pivoted and carved a clean downward cut across the monster, sending it staggering backward in a spray of purple droplets. Northern lunged forward and drove the invisible sword into the monster's chest, hoisting its entire frame upward before slamming it down onto another that charged at him. The monsters rushed him relentlessly, and he met them with equal intensity. His mind locked in perfect focus as he matched their ferocity with calculated precision, their frenzy with cold fury. It marked good progress in a short time, though perhaps short time stretched the meaning of the words. Northern had sunk so deeply into his task that time slipped away unnoticed. Monsters still poured from the rift as the drifters began losing their hold, even though Northern's presence made their task tenfold easier. The few creatures they had to deal with were becoming too much to handle. Many of them gasped for breath, their movements sluggish as the monsters pounced on them with predatory ease. The representatives of the citadels still served as a sturdy backbone, diving in for desperate rescues when needed. But even their efficiency had diminished tremendously from what it once was. And still the monsters poured from the rift, albeit, thankfully, only maelstrom ranks. Northern gritted his teeth so hard they could have shattered metal. What the hell are these people doing? Variolania reinforcements should have arrived by now. The soldiers, drifters of course, should have entered the estate already. Wasn't the student declared an esteemed honorary guest? What was delaying their reinforcement? Northern had a sinking feeling. It better not be. Though his mind burdened him with the thought, Northern really hoped it wasn't the case. The main city couldn't be under attack. There was no way. That would complicate everything. A green vine adorned with radiant golden roses slithered to his side. After swinging his hammer sideways and mangling one monster's body before sending it flying, Northern glanced at the beautiful woman beside him. Her beauty had a roguish, foreign quality as she dismounted the vines she'd been riding and landed with cat-like grace next to him. "We need to retreat." Northern glanced at her, the visor of molten vein pulsing with heightened brightness. Of course they did. The tide was shifting and not in their favor. With the way things were going, they definitely couldn't quench this disaster alone. Well, he could if he weren't so depleted, forced to be stingy with his void essence. Plus, the students and civilians had all been moved to safety. Why push himself any harder? Northern looked at the lady and nodded. She grinned, her fierce eyes radiating a defiant light that seemed strangely enchanting. As she flew away from his position, her vines intertwined and flowed toward Northern, who continued wielding his sword with cold, calculated ferocity. He turned his sweat-slicked face just as she descended from her vines. "I will watch everyone's back. That way retreating will be easier." The lady's face flickered with surprise. She hadn't even told him what she wanted, yet he had already figured it out. A smile curled across her defiant face as she murmured, "Amusing." She was already in motion, her vines writhing across the broken arena as though possessed with their own consciousness. Her balance remained flawless. Perhaps her feet somehow fused with the vines. Northern couldn't tell. He shrugged and straightened, launching his elbow into the jaw of a monster that lunged for him. He seized its lower jaw before the creature could reel backward, then drove the invisible blade deep into it and wrenched it free. Purple blood sprayed across his face in grotesque patterns. He slashed the sword downward, flicking the viscous stain away, rendering the blade pristinely invisible once more. Then he fixed his gaze forward, cold, stern, unwavering. The blue light in his eyes gleamed with sinister intensity. Meanwhile, his clone tore through the horde of monsters with escalating, almost maddening ferocity. The hammer carved terrifying arcs through the air, pulverizing anything it struck before sending the remains flying. The tempo of his attacks crescendoed until the very ground quaked and split with almost every swing. This created space for the others to execute a pincer formation and retreat, as the monsters stood disheveled, fixated on the singular terror he unleashed. As if this weren't enough, javelins of ice and fire began to soar skyward before raining down like harbingers of destruction. Each impact birthed an explosion that mushroomed into the atmosphere. All four Citadel representatives and the surviving drifters stared with expressions caught between shock and reluctant admiration. They understood the enigmatic paragon. But what in hell was that student? How could he possess such devastating power? Chapter 924, Acts of Heroism. With both versions of himself barring the monster's path and preventing them from pressing toward the retreating party, things grew rather gruesome. He couldn't afford to conserve much of his essence anymore. Of course, he had accepted that fact already. Right now, what he wanted was to create a containment with the last of his essence and trap the monsters within it until someone sensible came along. His clones would probably vanish and he would have to return to a slumbering body. But that was all right. There were so many things he worried about, but he couldn't afford to dwell on them. All he needed to do was wake up. Hell would break loose when he did. Northern, after confirming that the party of drifters had all retreated behind the Colosseum, stopped moving. Javelins of fire and ice still pelted the monsters with devastating force from above. Explosions bloomed across the expanse, painting the air with destruction. Their rabid, ferocious maws continued snarling at him with demented fury, stopped only by the invisible barrier of void force. Northern had another task in mind. Something else needed doing. He glanced at his other self, who had just struck down another monster with the flat of his sledgehammer. The molten vein Northern glanced back and nodded. There was really no need for such oddity. He was the same person. But Northern strangely found control easier when he approached both as different people. When he approached both as the same person, they easily spoke the same words or moved in unison. Hence, this was how Northern maintained control of both minds. The him in night terror armor bent down and touched the ground, closing his eyes. A cold mist flowed from his body. From the point where his fingers met earth, ice began to spread, crawling forward like a hungry tide. A crystalline infection consuming everything in its path. The other Northern shot forward like a bolt from a crossbow, tearing through the thick entanglement of rabid monsters with his mere speed and powerful frame alone. He leaped skyward at some point, twirling in the air. Time seemed to slow, as he raised his hand and saluted at the other Northern. Then he descended with his leg extended, like a dancer performing a deadly, twisted ballet. Boom! As he crashed into the ground, tectonic vibrations rippled through the earth, and everything overturned in an instant. The ground began to crack and split, the fissures racing like veins of destruction, tearing the land apart. Monsters lost their footing and tumbled down into the earthquake's origin, crushed as the land ripped open and swallowed them whole. Northern, being the only one left, cast a cold glance at the macabre scene and in that moment, intensified his efforts. More essence, volumes of it, poured into the ice he was building. The speed at which the ice flowed suddenly tripled. The ice blistered across the ground, flying over hulking frames, stones and monsters alike. It knew no discrimination and devoured everything in its path with equal hunger. The ice slithered across the battlefield, carving jagged, cruel spears that impaled whatever needed silencing with the cold precision of a seasoned assassin. The horrid and unsettling scene continued to unfold. Luckily, Northern was the only witness to the twisted creation he was wrought this time. The ice raced all the way to the back seats of the Colosseum, slithering over everything. At the edges, it shot skyward, curving to meet at the center of the sky. The Colosseum transformed into what looked like a massive cage carved of ice. Well, that was exactly what it was. The ice didn't just run on the surface. It seeped underground and lunged vicious spikes at anything lurking below. Toward the shimmering rift, thousands of ice spikes plunged in a grotesque entanglement that reinforced the frigid strength of each one, turning the place into a frozen land of execution. All of them waited for the next wave of monsters that would burst forth, ready to tear through them with merciless intensity. Northern sighed and stood up, staggering slightly. He dusted his hands and surveyed his surroundings. The cold began to seep into his skin. The sun had reached its crescendo, afternoon at its peak, poised to begin its descent down the slope of the horizon. Ah! Hell! Northern slowly faded into nothingness. Meanwhile, outside the Colosseum, the scene scattered across the estate was one of confusion and disaster. Though no monsters tore through them now, they remained in a disheveled state. The wounded lay on the lawn, with medics hastily attending to them, faces glistening with sweat, breaths coming in ragged pants. All injured had been gathered to one side, before the building dedicated to administration in the estate. They would have been moved inside, but equipment was scarce. Most stretchers remained abandoned in the Colosseum. In their rush, they had prioritized saving lives over salvaging gear. That was how Kalen and Nasira found themselves among the rows of people laid out on the bare ground. Beyond that, everyone stood with horror etched across their faces, their expressions freezing further when the ice shot up into the sky. Wide eyes tracked the glacial prison, minds racing to comprehend what was unfolding. Helena! Helena! Ellis shouted while weaving through the crowd to reach Helena, who appeared deep in conversation with one of the academy instructors. What is going on? Where is Northern? Helena turned to him, her brow furrowed with worry. Ellis studied her face, raising one dark eyebrow. His eyes narrowed to slits. "What's wrong, Hel? You can tell me." Helena exhaled, her breath a cloud of resignation. "We're not sure what exactly is happening, but we think he might be dead." Ellis's face darkened like storm clouds gathering. "What are you saying?" She stepped closer, her eyes soft with sympathy as she rested her hand gently on his shoulder. "Look, Ellie." Before she could finish, Ellis slapped her hand away. His face twisted into a mask of betrayal and disappointment. "The very fact that you can utter such a statement shows me how different our perspectives are. I finally understand why you and Northern never got along." "Northern, dead." He let out a bitter laugh. "The world would crumble first before someone like him dies." Helena's expression hardened as she pointed toward the reformed Colosseum. "Can't you see that? Do you think creating something of that magnitude was just a casual stroll in the park?" The moment it started, we felt both their presences vanish from the Colosseum. "We believe they sacrificed themselves to destroy all the monsters." Ellis tilted his chin upward, scoffing with undisguised contempt. "Yeah, dream on. The Northern I know is far too selfish for such heroics." He shrugged, regarding her with a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. "Not that I'd expect you to understand or agree. You don't know the first thing about Northern. I'll find him myself." As he turned to leave, Helena's hand struck like a viper, hitting him precisely on the nape of his neck. Ellis crumpled, his body falling limp into her waiting arms. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her words barely audible even to herself. Chapter 925. No moving forward. A large white bird, falcon-like in shape, soared through the sky, its massive wings slicing the wind with effortless grace. Clouds parted before its path, sometimes scattering like timid spectators, other times clustering around it like a veil, shielding its form from the world below. The falcon wasn't enormous, but it moved with a predator's elegance, each wing stretching a full meter in length. Ahead of it, a man hurtled through the air, propelled by shockwave bursts of speed. His face was a mask of grim determination, arms folded tightly as he cut through the sky's defiant winds. The sun blazed overhead, relentless in its assault, yet the man remained untouched by its fury. Not that it would have mattered. This season's heat was forgiving, but even if it weren't, he was a paragon. Such things were beneath his concern. 11 hours had passed since their departure from the trade city of Lithia. 11 hours of racing through the biting wind at breakneck speed. The journey had been smooth, not because the skies were safe, but because the paragon carried a far heavier burden. And because he wasn't alone. The graceful falcon matched his urgency, and together, they wove through the dangers of the open sky. Monsters came in all forms, titanic beasts, swarms that drowned their prey in numbers, relentless hunters. Yet evasion was easy when speed and instinct aligned so perfectly. The way the bird kept pace, seamless in its movements, made Paragon Rizel suspect that Byran himself was an Evans scent. Occasionally, winged horrors would rise to block their path or give chase. But the falcon needed no assistance. Byran would surge upward, talons flashing like daggers, and tear into the creatures with ruthless precision. His eyes gleamed, cold and unfeeling, as flesh parted beneath his grasp, a predator in its purest form. As they neared Fugal, Paragon Rizel's worry thickened, etching itself deeper into the grim lines of his face. He surged forward, a blur of motion, his body tearing through the sky with such speed that only a streak of light remained visible. A comet trailed by a flowing cold storm. Then the towering walls of Fugal rose in the distance. For the first time since their flight began, Burning Storm's expression shifted. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened. Whatever shadows had clung to him before now deepened. His face a portrait of foreboding. From above, Fugal was beautiful. A sprawl of orange-tiled roofs, aged but unbroken, indifferent to the city's hidden fangs. Time had carved its legacy into the streets, an old charm turned symbol of rebellion. It was the first, the first city to wrench itself free from monarchy's grip, setting a precedent others would follow. Or, more accurately, the first the government had liberated, not out of idealism but strategy. A calculated move to stretch their influence, to plant their flag in a world still ruled by kings and queens. This city bore their emblem. It was their stronghold, their beating heart. Yet now the air hung wrong. The pulse of the place felt off. Something was amiss. The streets lay silent, draped in an invisible darkness that clung like a shroud. Burning Storm had spent decades of his life here. Even in his later years as a hermit, he knew the pulse of this city. By this hour, the streets should have been alive. People bustling, voices weaving through the air. The hum of a city that thrived on its freedom. Fugal was different, more vibrant than most. Here, laughter spilled freely. Couples strolled along the arched bridges, leaning over the rails to watch the lakes shimmer. Children darted through the parks, their parents lounging under the sun's warmth. This was a place without chains. No rigid hierarchy, no suffocating class divides. Oh, status existed, but it didn't strangle the spirit of the people. Yet what stretched beneath Burning Storm now was a ghost. A hollow shell. He sensed life, faint, trembling, behind locked doors, behind shuttered windows. Fear coiled in the air like smoke. Paragon Rizel slowed, then landed without a sound, his descent as soft as a whisper. Behind him, the falcon dissolved in a ripple of white light. Feathers melted into fabric, wings into flowing sleeves, until a white-haired man stood in its place. His garb strange, elegant, as if woven from different eras and dispensation of time. The paragon stood before the steps leading to the government official's mini-estate. The silence was thick, suffocating, but he knew. The reason he had flown from Lithia was here. With a single push, the wrought iron gates groaned open, their protest echoing through the empty courtyard. His eyes hardened as the estate's interior unfolded before him. Rows of soldiers in black uniforms stood rigid, flanking both sides of the path like statues carved from shadow. A welcome party? Rizel knew better. His old friend had always been theatrical. Looks like this Dante person prepared quite the welcome for you. Byron's voice was a quiet blade as they strode forward, unflinching, between the silent ranks. Rizel didn't so much as glance at them. His steps were measured, deliberate. He's childish. Won't admit it, but he's never gotten over me. Inspiring, Byron mused. To keep that attitude even now, my master could learn from your composure. A beat of silence. Rizel's gaze flickered. How did you even meet Rel? How did he become your master? The question was low, almost reluctant. I can't make sense of it, Byron whispered dryly. Surely now isn't the time for stories, unless you're too level-headed. Rizel's jaw tightened. Or maybe I'm clinging to it. Right now I'm burning inside. A distraction wouldn't hurt. Byron halted. The paragon followed suit. Before them stood a lone figure, hands wrapped around a thick rod. One end bulbous and brutal, clearly designed to pound flesh into pulp. The man's military cap cast his face in shadow, but strands of ashen hair escaped its grip, swaying lazily in the faint breeze. His expression was carved stone, until the corners of his mouth twisted into a smirk. With deliberate slowness, he freed one hand from the weapon and stepped forward. The bat's heavy end thumped against the ground in a grating, offbeat rhythm. Burning Storm barely registered the noise. His focus remained razor-edged. The soldier stopped 3 meters away, then slowly lifted his chin. Slitted, horizontal eyes locked onto the paragon. Lieutenant Dante said. He paused, deliberately. No. Moving forward. Chapter 926. Wrong match. The wind howled through the silence that followed the soldier's words. Neither Rizel nor Byron responded, though Byron wasn't in a position to answer anyway. A dozen heartbeats passed as Burning Storm surveyed their surroundings before finally lowering his gaze. And if I insist? The soldier's grin stretched unnaturally wide, his eyes mirroring the madness of his smile. I'll feast on your flesh, he hissed. Rip you apart tendon by tendon and feed your scraps to the sewer rats. A slow smile spread across Paragon Rizel's face, his jade-green eyes glowing with hidden depths, like calm waters masking something monstrous beneath. His crimson spikes swayed gently as he tilted his head. With a subtle curl of his lip, he stepped forward, casually, effortlessly brushing past the frozen soldier. The man's eyes bulged, his grin splitting wider until it threatened to tear his face apart. His entire body trembled with unspent violence. Byran shot him a look of pure disdain as he moved to follow. Then, impossibly, the soldier pivoted with unnatural speed, his hand shooting out to grab Byron's flowing garments. Burning Storm's eyes widened. This shouldn't be possible. Unless, his racing thoughts shattered as he turned. The soldier had just made the last mistake of his life. No one saw the blade move. One moment the soldier's hand clutched fabric. The next, his severed forearm spun through the air, blood arcing in thick ropes from the stump. A guttural scream tore from the man's throat as he stumbled back, clutching his spurting wound. Byran calmly used the loose outer layer of his outfit, always draping over his shoulders, to shield himself from the crimson spray. His other hand rested lightly on his sword hilt, as if he'd never moved at all. Burning Storm's face twisted into an amused grin. Wow! Byran examined his ruined garment with visible irritation. In severing the offending hand, he'd only made the damage worse. His frown deepened as he muttered, "I should have vaporized him instead." The Paragon stepped closer, his smile sharp with manic curiosity. "How did you even do that?" Byran barely glanced up, still preoccupied with his stained clothing. Nearby, soldiers had rushed to aid their wounded comrade, only to be violently rebuffed. The maimed man tore a strip from his uniform, hastily binding the bleeding stump before fixing Byran with a glare hot enough to melt steel. Rizel leaned in, his voice low. "Careful. He might be a paragon. A new one. That's the only way he broke my essence hold. Paragons weren't merely strong-willed. They were fused with their very essence, allowing them to impose their soul's form upon reality. This manifested in 3 stages. What Rizel had used here and in Lithia was merely the first, subtle environmental interaction. While sufficient to immobilize lesser warriors, another paragon could break free. And this strange soldier had done exactly that. Byran shrugged, indifferent. "I'll repaint the floor with his face." The Sword King advanced slowly as Burning Storm shot him one last grinning glance before turning away. The maimed soldier suddenly brandished his bat with his remaining hand, bellowing, "You'll regret this." Then he lunged not toward Byran, but toward his own troops. The Sword King's eyebrow arched. Madness! Perhaps that explained it. Byran remained still, observing with detached curiosity as the soldier swung his bat into a comrade's stomach, dropping the man to his knees. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the fallen soldier's wrist, eyed it clinically, then with a flash of steel severed the hand. He attached the bloody stump to his own arm with visible distaste. Instantly, his veins pulsed black as they consumed the graft, reshaping the foreign flesh into a perfect match. When he turned back, his smile had returned wider now, unhinged. Byran watched, face impassive. His fingers curled lightly around his sword hilt, the subtle tilt of steel betraying his building irritation. Blue fire kindled in his eyes as his lips twisted downward. "Filth." The word dripped with glacial contempt. The man threw back his head in a madman's cackle. "Say it again, rat!" he shrieked, spittle flying. In one explosive motion, he launched himself through the air covering impossible distance, and came crashing down toward Byran, bat raised high. The Sword King barely flicked his wrist. His sword's flat side met the blow with a dull clang, his expression utterly bored. A subtle pivot and the attacker went sprawling. Before the man could blink, Byron's foot connected like a lightning strike. The kick sent him hurtling backward with bone-shattering force, smashing through the estate's concrete wall in an explosion of dust and debris. Byran didn't even blink. With deliberate slowness, He began sliding Dark Mortal back into its sheath. Then, impossibly, the figure emerged from the wreckage. No broken bones. No visible damage. Just that same deranged grin, though now smeared with dust. That kick would have reduced a normal man to paste. But an Avancent's body was different. Unnaturally durable. The soldier came screaming toward Byran, bat raised high, his laughter peeling through the air like shattered glass. His charge gained terrifying momentum, until his eyes bulged in shock. The white-haired swordsman stood directly in his path. One pale finger pressed against the madman's forehead. The soldier's legs pistoned uselessly against the ground. The world itself seemed to reject his movement, all resistance funneling through that single fingertip holding him at bay. When he swung his bat in desperate fury, Byran merely cocked his hand back and delivered a slap that cracked like thunder. The impact sent the man spinning through the air, his body whipping like a ragdoll before crashing through another section of wall. Byran examined his palm with visceral disgust. Filthy. Revolting. He hated touching vermin. Rubble shifted. The soldier emerged face-swollen, uniform caked in dust. Gone was the manic grin. In its place, an angry red welt bloomed across his cheek, distorting his features with every throbbing pulse. Pure, unadulterated rage twisted what remained of his face. Chapter 9:27. Full of disgust. Byran stared at the man, his face twisted with a strange expression. A cocktail of subtle surprise and raw disgust. The soldier had surprised him not once now, but twice. He never expected any living soul, paragon or not, to stand upright and healthy after being struck by him. Of course, Byran understood this probably had something to do with the guy's talent, but Byran lived by certain expectations about how battles unfolded, expectations that depended on him, not whatever powers his opponent might or might not possess. It seemed he would need to take things more seriously than planned. I don't want to break him, that's the thing. Byran wasn't truly part of this conflict. He viewed everything from a helper's vantage point. He would remain at peace with every opponent he faced, except for his disgust that this man had touched him with those filthy hands. Nothing else prodded at the depths of how petty and tyrannical he could become. But even so, he still wasn't necessarily invested in the battle, so he approached nothing with the determination to win or kill. Of course, he couldn't lose. Even without trying, losing remained impossible. But the annoying problem was that this ugly man disgusted him deeply, and he hated it. Withstanding a slap from him was enough to make Byran's skin crawl with irritation. Byran clicked his tongue. That slap tore heads from necks back in the day. Even with only fragments of memory to rely on, Byran knew what he was capable of. Of course, he didn't know how far back in the day truly was. Information about his era lay buried in a much thicker and more dangerous fog than knowledge of his capabilities. Northern suspected Byran came from the lost civilization, a dispensation of time no one remembered, not even history itself, it seemed. He had only discovered this through the system's descriptions, when Soul Taker broke and the souls it had imprisoned were finally released. But aside from that, Byran remained pretty much clueless about his origins. Yet he was an unfairly formidable warrior. The bastard, with a burning furious shout, blistered forward. He brandished the bat in his hands, gripping it tightly, furiously swinging from behind as he devoured the distance between him and the white-haired man in barely a second. His eyes flashed with bloodthirst, but Byran couldn't be bothered. They looked like the eyes of a wounded pup desperately trying to matter to him. He raised his hand and smacked the soldier down on the crown of his head, causing him to crash into the ground with a sickening thud. Then, with irritation etched across his face, Byran kicked him away. The guy flew off like a kicked ball, powerless against the force that launched him through the air. A second later, he crashed somewhere in the distance. Since the Sword King had decided to be a little bit serious, he pressed further, covering a great distance by blurring forward. He materialized before the fallen man as if he'd stepped out of the wind itself. Then he raised his sword and brought it down in a casual motion. The ground split open from where the boy lay, the crack extending far into the reaches of the estate. Buildings trembled and sank into the fractured earth, trees splintering as countless structures lost their foundation. A cacophony of destruction filled the air, making the guy pale with terror. His arm had missed the Sword King's blade by barely a hair's breadth. Sweat drenched his face as he stared at the devastation. His chest heaved as he began to contemplate exactly what chain of decisions had brought him to this position. Immediately, Byran decided to hang back. Burning Storm marched forward alone. A grim yet somber expression settled on Rizel's face, a single prayer repeating in his mind with each deliberate step. Finally, he reached the main building of the estate, an enormous structure shaped like a vast letter C. Though several other buildings clustered around it, the main edifice stood so prominent and imposing that the others seemed mere fragments, support systems designed only to enhance its already blinding splendor. Red banners draped down various sections of the walls, as if the building itself were bleeding. Each banner bore the insignia of a crown slashed apart by two swords and given wings to fly. But Paragon Rizel's eyes skipped over both banner and insignia. He had seen them so many times they bored him now. Lazily perched on the rounded edge of the fountain in front of the main building sat another man. An aura clung to him that felt utterly different from the man before. Burning Storm could instantly tell. Just what did Dante do to gain two paragons all of a sudden? The man stood up and exhaled, stretching his long, slender legs by extending one and bending it at the knee. He repeated the same motion with the other leg before straightening to his full height and suddenly swinging his arm to offer the man standing before him a respectful salute. Burning Storm couldn't hide his surprise. Oh, at least this one has some manners. But experience had taught him it was usually the nicest ones who proved most dangerous. The soldier's voice boomed with undisguised pride. I am Major Ram. I have heard about the great deeds Burning Storm of Veiled Light accomplished. You were an indestructible pillar during your years of service. Paragon Rizel stared back with an impassive expression. He appeared neither impressed nor disgusted by the man's words. If anything, wariness shadowed his features. The soldier paused, lowering his head. His shoulders trembled slightly. Paragon Rizel's expression shifted to puzzlement. Is he crying or laughing? Burning Storm couldn't tell. But then the soldier raised his head and wiped away the tiny tear clinging to the corner of his eye. I'm really disappointed in you, Paragon Rizel. You who should have been the very heart of our cause now stand in opposition to it. Is this how rotten you've become? How far you've lost your way? I used to look up to you, you know? Ha! Chapter 928. Fierce Start. Paragon Rizel froze, dumbstruck. Not because the young soldier's words confused him, but for two distinct reasons. First, the boy's knowledge of such information startled him. Yet a heartbeat later, this revelation lost its surprise. After all, Dante spearheaded this entire revolution. The man had slaughtered his own mentor to ignite it. Paragon Rizel hardened his resolve, recognizing that Dante would employ any tactic, no matter how extreme, to carve his rebellion's justification into the hearts of all who listened, even if that meant twisting truths and molding impressionable minds like clay on a potter's wheel. Paragon Rizel pitied them, though he recognized the irony of his sympathy given his current predicament. At this moment, Dante stood inside that complex with his wife and other government officials, including Rizel's father. Not that his father was the reason for his presence here. The thought of the man barely rippled through his consciousness. Paragon Rizel stared into space for several heartbeats before finally lifting his hand to run fingers through his hair. His jade-green eyes remained lakes of calm. He sighed. Oh dear stars, what poison has Dante fed you all? I can't fathom what that gutter-born snake has sold you. Some fairy tale about being Gafares' descendant? The only soul in this world blessed with the grand mandate of unification, or at least the only one who cares enough to fulfill it. The young soldier stood rigid, his expression masking a storm of pain and fury beneath its stern surface. Paragon Rizel waved his hand dismissively, as if shooing away an irritating insect. Not that I care. Dante weaves lies like a master tailor. I'm certain he has you all wrapped around his finger. feeding you precisely the scraps of information needed to keep you leashed. Burning Storm's glare intensified, his eyes glinting like winter frost, cold and devoid of mercy. I don't expect you to believe me. Frankly, I couldn't care less. But you will step aside, or you'll discover firsthand why they call me Burning Storm. The soldier straightened his posture and adjusted his military cap until it cast his eyes in shadow. Burning Storm, or whatever name you hide behind. I don't give a damn about the might or power it represents. I'll be the one passing judgment for your sins of disloyalty and treason against our cause. The young soldier summoned his weapon and lunged toward Paragon Ryzel. In the blink of an eye, he closed the distance between them. He whirled through the air like a cyclone unleashing a tempest of strikes as he spun around the Paragon. Burning Storm, sword already poised for battle, deflected the onslaught but staggered backward 2 steps, boots scraping against the ground. The young soldier retreated slightly before charging again, his form blurring with preternatural speed. Both hands now wielded silver daggers, curved like crescent moons with pronounced, razor-sharp angles that caught the light with deadly promise. He moved with the fluid grace of a silent dance, each strike forcing Paragon Ryzel deeper into a defensive stance that pushed him backward across the battlefield. His footwork shifted rhythmically, deliberate and measured when necessary, then erupting into astonishing bursts of speed that caught the eye unawares. At first, Paragon Ryzel found himself stunned by the masterful artistry of movement his opponent displayed. The young soldier advanced with calculated precision, each motion purposeful and economical. He knew exactly what each step would accomplish, manipulating the very foundations of their combat to suit his aggressive strategy. No wasted movement, no hesitation, only pure, lethal intent. Paragon Ryzel couldn't mask his surprise that one so young possessed such extraordinary mastery of footwork. It was refreshing to witness someone who had truly mastered the fundamentals. Without such dedication, the young soldier could never exhibit such composure while wielding such overwhelming power. He admired it, but that admiration ended there. Burning Storm furrowed his brows as he intercepted the next flurry of attacks, his movements flowing in perfect harmony with the onslaught, despite wielding only a single claymore that glinted like frozen lightning in the light. The Paragon was, without question, a battle-hardened master in his own right. A claymore typically presented a severe disadvantage against swift daggers, yet in his hands this fundamental rule of combat seemed to dissolve like morning mist. After just 1 minute of their deadly dance, the young soldier grew unsettled by the serene composure with which Paragon Ryzel met each of his strikes. "If you truly intend to stop me," Ryzel murmured, voice steady as stone, "you'll need more than mere dagger strikes. I stand here desperate, and so I will act with a desperate man's resolve." Burning Storm widened his stance and raised his sword fractionally higher. His eyes narrowed to slits, irises igniting with an emerald glow as the atmosphere around him shimmered and warped like heat above flames. Then, in one fluid motion that defied human perception, Paragon Ryzel vanished from sight and thrust forward. His sword didn't simply part the air, it violated it. A colossal tear ripped through space with impossible speed, cleaving through the fountain they now stood over 30 meters away from, and punching through the building beyond as though it were made of parchment. The banner and everything in the blade's path split cleanly in two, yet strangely, the bisected structures remained suspended, refusing to crumble apart. In that heartbeat of suspended time, far in the distance, a catastrophic earthquake erupted. The ground convulsed with tremendous force, buildings from their vantage point sinking as though swallowed by the earth itself. Paragon Ryzel glanced back, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Looks like my subordinate is already beginning to warm up to the festivities." A dark frown etched itself across the young soldier's face, impossible to miss despite the shadow shrouding his eyes. Paragon Ryzel's mouth curled into a half-smile as he scoffed. With casual indifference, he began to advance, strolling toward the path his blade had carved through reality. The ground tiles lay shattered and broken, gouged into a narrow channel where his cleave had passed. But the true marvel remained the strange vacuum his strike had created, a corridor where wind refused to flow, as though that thin slice of the world had been excised from existence itself. This display of power dwarfed what he had shown in Lithia. There, he had merely channeled his cleaving force through his bare hand. Here, that same devastating ability manifested through a blade crafted for death. And now there was no reason for restraint. The vicinity stood emptied of civilians. In this moment, should he choose, he could unleash the full form of his essence manifestation, unfettered and complete. He stood but a single thought away from that decision, with only one thing staying his hand: his reluctance to extinguish the life of this young, promising soldier who stood before him like a candle in a tempest. Chapter 929, Darklight. The young promising soldier stood afar from Burning Storm, fixing the vibrant, handsome man a blazing glare. Burning Storm barely noticed. He couldn't afford to waste any time, so he simply marched toward the complex, daring the young soldier to try his best to stop him. The soldier answered the silent challenge and leaped into the air, landing softly atop a street lamp pole. More earthquakes rocked the ground, violent tremors rippling through the land like angry waves. The soldier spun his dagger and joined its two halves together. The metal curved and extended, forming a stringless bow in his grip. He opened his hands, and an arrow of pale moonlight began to manifest between his fingers. He knocked the arrow to the bow, and only then did the invisible string reveal itself, glinting with a cold, almost untraceable light. He pulled and released. The arrow of light flew with terrifying speed, but Burning Storm merely cocked his head, letting the arrow whistle past him. His steps never faltered as he continued forward. A few more arrows were already gliding through the air with cold, sickening whistles. The man sidestepped abruptly and swung the claymore in his hands. All the arrows shattered as though they had crashed against an invisible wall of blades. Burning Storm fixed the guy with an indifferent gaze. The moment the soldier met those emerald eyes, he trembled visibly, a cold dread seeping into his bones like winter frost. But he gritted his teeth and knocked another arrow. This time it was different, a black arrow. He stretched back the string as if he didn't care if it snapped. Then he released. The arrow moved so fast it seemed to vanish. Instantly, Burning Storm swept his sword upward, his hands blurring as he deflected multiple strikes in a whirlwind of motion. The arrows were sharp and fast, carved out of darkness itself. They mocked distance, reaching their target from multiple angles all at once. But their target was a fearsome paragon who lived within the very concept of force and motion. Burning Storm moved with lightning speed, pushing a step forward and moving even more fiercely, crushing every single one of the black arrows that endlessly battered him from all angles. Then he struck the young soldier with a fierce glare and slashed the wind. The young soldier immediately flew off the pole, tumbling through the air before landing on another lamp post almost instantaneously. As he fled, the pole he'd been standing on sliced into different lengths, as did several buildings behind him, causing the night to resound with a deafening rumble like thunder cracking the earth. Burning Storm swung his sword again and again, each swing unleashing cutting power that devoured distance. Neighboring buildings crashed and shattered, trembling as scars tore through their magnificent forms like cloth ripped by invisible claws. The soldier moved with nimble grace, dancing across Burning Storm's slashes as though choreographed. Even mid-flight, he managed to knock arrows and shoot with deadly precision. The black arrows, when released, multiplied and dispersed before reaching Burning Storm. They converged from multiple directions all at once, a deadly storm of midnight points. Burning Storm regarded these arrows with utter indifference. All of them were swallowed and brutally sliced with each swing of his massive claymore, the blades singing through the air with terrible beauty. His slashes were powerful and colossal, but they couldn't catch his elusive opponent. Burning Storm paused for a heartbeat, eyes narrowing to slits. In that brief moment, the soldier's eyes flared with white light. With furiously fast motion, he knocked two arrows simultaneously. One black, one white. Both arrows blasted from the bow upon release, twisting around each other like lovers in a fatal dance. They carried the wind with them as they hurtled toward the Paragon. But Paragon Rizel merely stood his ground. The arrows collided with him and shattered like glass against stone. The young soldier paled first, then exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He jumped down from the pole, landing softly on the broken ground. With measured steps, he began walking toward Burning Storm. "You know, we were very well informed about your broken talent," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. He studied Burning Storm with undisguised interest, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "The more you fight, the stronger and more energetic you become. Of course, you're not invincible, you just have a broad reservoir of essence because you're a paragon. But, you know," he paused, eyes glinting, "I am a paragon too, and that means I have what it takes to take your already halved essence away." He stopped, the bow vanishing into white sparks that drifted away like fireflies in the night. "While I earnestly yearn to defeat you for how badly you broke the hearts of all young soldiers who looked up to you, I am well aware that in the end, it's not my job to do so. There's only one person who can truly take care of you." His voice hardened, resolve sharpening his features. "However, even if it means I die, I have to make you pay somehow. I have to make my brothers proud and leave a crude scar on the Burning Storm who betrayed the vision of the government." A dark frown shadowed Burning Storm's eyes, yet despite this, his green eyes glimmered with a ghastly handsomeness that seemed almost supernatural. He released the claymore, already summoning another set of weapons. Whirlwinds of sparks enveloped both his hands, dancing like angry spirits waiting to take form. But in that moment of transition, the young soldier blazed forward, covering the distance with blurring speed. He reached Burning Storm and lifted his entire body into the air. As he did, his form began to unravel, revealing something else beneath, something inhuman. Wicked, powerful black talons crashed down toward Rizel, but he vanished from their path, causing the talons to pulverize the ground where he had stood. The massive claws squeezed the chunk of stone they'd grabbed, reducing the rubble to dust with terrifying ease. Standing on the shattered ground were two enormous talons, black as if they'd been dipped in the ink of midnight itself. Chapter 930. The Cockatrice. What loomed before Burning Storm defied nature itself. A twisted aberration that haunted the line between magnificence and monstrosity. From talons upward, its body wore obsidian like a second skin, black as charred bone, gleaming with the luster of polished jet. Its scaled legs, corded with raw power, ended in claws curved like harvesting sickles, carving deep wounds into the earth with each step. Shadows clung to the midnight of its limbs like desperate lovers, as though the ground itself dared not reflect such darkness. Above the talons, however, the beast transformed into a specter of feathers and flesh. The remainder of its body wore pearlescent white, not soft or inviting, but cold and dangerous, like frost crystallized over ancient armor. Its feathers caught the moonlight in ripples of silver as it moved, fluid yet precise. The ridges of its scaled chest expanded with each breath, glinting like ivory daggers beneath a sheath of coiled muscle. Massive wings unfurled like celestial banners torn from the sky itself, pristine white near the spine, but dissolving to soot black at the edges, as if flames had licked their tips and left behind permanent scars. Its head crowned the creature in grotesque splendor. A rooster's crest, jagged and regal, jutted forth in shades of frostbitten alabaster. White wattles hung from its beak like battle standards, unmarred save for the venom's breath that shimmered like morning dew in the cold air. Its eyes, calculating and ancient, pierced the darkness with silver fire, aware and unervingly intelligent. Paragon Rizel watched without surprise, his face a mask of cool appraisal. This man, despite his youth, bore the unmistakable mark of their kind. For this was the full manifestation of a paragon. Being a paragon means knowing the true form of your essence, a connection so profound it bridges you closer to your soul source than ever before. This sacred knowledge reawakens the hereditary traits and celestial characteristics of constellations, weaving them back into the tapestry of existence. For paragons, essence manifestation simply meant assuming the true form of your essence. It transcends metaphor, becoming physical, tangible, real. You transform into a walking embodiment of pure essence. Monsters follow different rules, yet the fundamental principles remained surprisingly similar. Essence manifestation begins with your essence's relationship to your environment, but the journey starts within. Your essence recognizes you as part of that environment, the first territory it must claim. Only after it has bonded with you, reshaping your very being to conform to its nature, does it reach outward to affect your surroundings, imprinting your will upon reality itself. Though Paragon Rizel had believed this phenomenon belonged exclusively to luminaries, he'd been puzzling over what truly defined a luminary and the heights of power such beings might reach. The clash between the abyssal Belial and one of Ral's summons had illuminated the path to his conclusion. Monsters existed as natural embodiments of essence. They required no grotesque transformation to transcend humanity because they had never been human. Their otherworldly nature granted them the freedom to bypass the first stage, allowing them to immediately subjugate their surroundings with raw will. This revelation had kindled Burning Storm's desire to ascend to luminary status into a roaring flame. Now that the young soldier had manifested his essence, the weight of his will would press upon reality with terrible force. Paragon Rizel understood the need for caution. Still, he recognized the soldier's actions as desperate recklessness. Essence manifestation would devour his reserves like a starving beast. More importantly, Rizel remained confident he could defeat the young soldier without resorting to manifesting his own essence. Thinking you can take me down with essence manifestation is one hell of a bold move. The white cockatrice loomed above, its presence electric. Despite this otherworldly form, the young soldier's voice remained recognizable, though now laced with an unsettling grit, like words scraped across stone. You are full of yourself, Burning Storm. You don't even know what I embody. Boy, you're a bastard. The young soldier's beak parted in a savage snarl, rage rippling through his transformed body. How dare you! A growl tore from his throat as he lunged forward, taking mountain-crushing strides toward the Paragon. White sparks danced around his form like angry stars, trailing behind him as he moved, a deadly blur of motion. Both obsidian talons crashed into the earth where Rizel had stood moments before. Paragon Rizel twisted away, his body spinning out of danger by a hair's breadth. His eyes narrowed at the deep gorges left behind, cold lacerations torn into the earth as though reality itself had been wounded. The cockatrice was powerful, no doubt. Rizel extended the twin swords in his hands, swinging them in sharp, precise patterns, testing the weight of his limbs. Then he vanished forward, becoming nothing but intent and motion. The cockatrice now gleamed with silvery armor that seemed harvested from moonlight itself, a luminous second skin shimmering across its entire form. Its tail bore partial plating, silver scales interwoven with armor rings that sang like distant bells with each sweeping movement. Gauntlets encased its deadly talons, each claw enhanced with silver blades grafted onto every toe, transforming natural weapons into engineered destruction. Even its face bore the touch of martial craft, a grim helm that honored rather than obscured its primal rooster visage. A crown of silver arced backward over its skull, sweeping behind the comb like frozen flames caught in metal, its edges jagged and thirsting for blood. The young soldier unfurled his massive wings with a thunderous crack, unleashing a cyclone that tore through the air with hurricane force. The howling maelstrom buffeted Paragon Rizel, disrupting his forward momentum. Yet his twin swords cut through the tempest with stubborn determination, hurling a devastating arc of force that cleaved the very wind itself. Metal shrieked against metal as the armored wings intercepted both blades in rapid succession, each impact ringing out with a guttural metallic scream that echoed across the estate. The ground beneath them surrendered to their power, fracturing in violent spiderweb patterns as deep fissures sliced into the foundation of the earth. Paragon Rizel felt his cutting force scatter and dissipate against the unyielding armor, the energy rippling outward in waves of destructive potential. Around them, structures buckled under invisible pressure. Buildings didn't merely suffer damage, they were bisected with surgical precision, as though reality itself had become a blade. Chunks of stone and timber separated along impossible lines, not from the cyclonic wind, but as if the fundamental laws of nature had momentarily rewritten themselves. The world responded with a soul-wrenching groan that vibrated through bone and sinew, a primal sound suggesting the very fabric of existence might tear apart at the seams. Their surroundings bore witness to the clash, marked as if some colossal titan had dragged an immeasurable sword across the estate. Ancient roots snapped, walls collapsed, and windows exploded into glittering shards, all casualties of a confrontation that had barely begun. And Burning Storm had not even unleashed his essence manifestation. Chapter 931, Essence Fire. The armored cockatrice lunged again, its massive form surprisingly agile as it twisted midair. Its silver-plated beak snapped like a guillotine, missing Burning Storm's shoulder by mere inches. The air itself seemed to part before the creature's strike, creating a vacuum that pulled at Ryzel's clothing. Burning Storm pivoted, twin swords singing through the air in a deadly cross pattern. The cockatrice let out with a deafening screech that shattered remaining windows for hundreds of meters. Glass rained down like crystal tears as the beast's armored tail whipped forward with devastating force, carving through a marble column as if it were paper. Ryzel dodged with preternatural speed, but the edge of the tail's armored plates grazed his cheek, drawing a thin line of crimson. Rather than retreat, he charged forward, using the momentum to slide beneath the cockatrice's massive form. From below, he struck upward with both blades, aiming for the softer underbelly between armor plates. The swords connected, but instead of piercing flesh, they met unexpected resistance. Sparks erupted like angry fireflies as metal scraped against an invisible shield of essence. "You didn't think it would be that easy?" The young soldier taunted. "My essence is petrification, the very power that turns living things to stone." The ground beneath Burning Storm's feet began to crystallize, stone creeping up his boots like hungry vines. Ryzel leapt backward just as the transformation reached his ankles, shattering the partially transmuted stone with raw force. "Impressive," Burning Storm acknowledged, his emerald eyes calculating. "But petrification requires sustained focus, and I won't give you that luxury." He vanished in a blur of motion, reappearing behind the cockatrice. His twin swords merged into a singular great blade in mid-swing, the transformation so seamless it seemed like sleight of hand. The unified weapon hummed with barely contained power as it arced toward the beast's spine. The cockatrice spun with uncanny speed, its armored wings forming a protective cocoon. The impact sent thunderous vibrations through the air, creating ripples of force that tore through the remaining structures around them. What had once been an elegant estate now resembled a war zone, rubble and destruction stretching as far as the eye could see. The creature snarled, silver eyes narrowing. "You're holding back. Show me your true form, traitor. Show me the flames that earned you your title." Paragon Ryzel's face remained impassive, but something dangerous flickered behind his emerald gaze. "You wish to see fire?" With a controlled exhale, Burning Storm altered his stance. His sword began to glow, first red, then white-hot, the metal seeming to consume light rather than reflect it. The air around him shimmered with heat, distorting reality itself. Very well. Without manifesting his full essence, Ryzel channeled raw power into his blade. When he swung, it wasn't merely metal that cut through the air. It was concentrated force, devastating in its purity. The sword left trails of superheated air in its wake, creating a vacuum that imploded with deafening force. The cockatrice raised both armored wings to block, but this time, the impact sent it sliding backward, talons gouging deep trenches in the earth. Its silver armor glowed cherry red where Ryzel's blade had connected, the metal warping under extreme heat. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the creature's inhuman features. Burning Storm pressed his advantage, each step creating small craters in the ground, each swing of his superheated blade unleashing waves of concentrated force. The cockatrice parried and dodged with increasing desperation, its movements becoming more defensive than offensive. "This is but a fraction of my power," Paragon Ryzel stated, his voice carrying over the cacophony of destruction. "You speak of betrayal without understanding the greater vision. There is no vision that justifies alliance with evil. Darkness. Destruction. The cockatrice spat a glob of venomous essence that sizzled through the air. Burning Storm sidestepped the projectile, which struck a fallen pillar behind him. The marble instantly crystallized, turning to solid stone with veins of silver running through it. You are nothing but a narrow-minded fool. All of you, Burning Storm replied, his blade now leaving afterimages as it sliced through the air. The lieutenant you so faithfully serve keeps you blind to the true threats. The cockatrice unleashed another cyclonic blast from its wings, but this time, Rizel didn't attempt to cut through it. Instead, he planted his feet firmly, his blade held vertically before him. The wind howled and tore at his clothing, but he remained unmoved, a statue in the eye of the storm. When the gale subsided, Burning Storm stood unscathed, a thin smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He thrust his sword skyward, and the air around him ignited, not with common flame, but with essence fire, a mesmerizing dance of emerald and gold that consumed nothing yet radiated terrible heat. The fire spiraled up his arm, across his shoulders, down his spine, until his entire form was outlined in burning light. The cockatrice took an involuntary step backward, its silver eyes wide with primal fear. Rizel explained calmly, "This isn't full manifestation, it's merely a taste." With a flick of his wrist, he sent a wave of essence fire hurtling toward the creature. The cockatrice crossed its armored wings before it, essence gathering to create a shield of petrifying energy. Fire met stone in a catastrophic collision that sent shockwaves rippling outward. The ground beneath them split open, revealing the foundation stones of the buildings around. Through the chaos, the cockatrice lunged forward, one talon extended in a desperate strike. Its claws, now glowing with obsidian-petrifying essence, aimed straight for Paragon Rizel's heart. Burning Storm pivoted at the last possible moment, the talon missing his vital organs but tearing through his side. Blood and fire mixed as he spun away, his own blade slicing across the cockatrice's shoulder joint where armor plates met. Crimson ichor sprayed from the wound, sizzling where it touched Rizel's essence fire. The creature shrieked in pain and fury, its injured wing drooping slightly. They circled each other, both wounded, both deadly. The young soldier's manifestation was impressive but draining his reserves rapidly. Already, the edges of his armored form seemed less solid, the silver of his eyes flickering like a guttering candle. "You can't maintain this form much longer," Burning Storm observed, his own wound already cauterizing from the heat of his essence fire. "Yield now, and live to fight another day." The cockatrice spat, gathering its remaining strength. "I would rather die than yield to a traitor." The air between them grew heavy with concentrated essence, reality itself bending under the pressure of their opposing wills. The cockatrice's petrifying aura expanded outward, turning small debris to stone wherever it touched. Burning Storm's essence fire intensified in response, consuming and crushing the petrification effect with terrifying force wherever the two powers met. "So be it," Rizel said softly, almost regretfully. The cockatrice launched itself forward in one final, desperate attack, both talons extended, beak open in a silent scream of defiance. Its remaining strength poured into this last strike, turning its entire form into a missile of petrifying essence. Burning Storm did not dodge. Instead, he met the charge head-on, his blade held before him like a spear. As the distance closed between them, he channeled all his essence fire into the sword, causing it to shine with unbearable brightness. The collision was inevitable, devastating, and final. In that moment of impact, time itself seemed to hesitate. The emerald flames didn't merely burn. They compressed and sharpened along the edge of Rizel's blade, becoming a cutting inferno with crushing weight. The petrifying force of the cockatrice met this dual-natured essence, creating a nexus of power that hovered between them like a newborn star. Then, with a sound like the world taking its final breath, the balance broke. Burning Storm's essence pressed upon reality with its crushing will despite not fully manifesting his essence. The emerald flames spiraled around the blade in tightening bands, simultaneously slicing through the cockatrice's defenses while compressing with gravitational force. The sword pierced through the nexus not just with sharpness but with overwhelming pressure, cleaving through armor as the fire weight behind it crushed essence and will alike. The creature's momentum carried it forward onto the sword even as Rizel's cutting flames raced along the metal. Where they touched, the cockatrice's form didn't simply burn. It collapsed inward, compressed and sliced from within by the dual nature of Burning Storm's essence. Armor plates didn't melt but imploded, crushed by invisible weight before being severed by emerald-edged fire. The young soldier's scream, human once more as his manifestation faltered, echoed across the ruined estate. His form flickered between beast and man, essence and flesh, the magnificent armor not crumbling but compacting into itself before being sliced apart, falling away like precisely cut fragments and vanishing into sparks. Paragon Rizel withdrew his blade in a single, clean motion, stepping aside as the young soldier collapsed to his knees. Blood mixed with rapidly dissipating essence pooled beneath him, yet still, defiance burned in his eyes. He gasped, looking up at Burning Storm. "Finish it. Prove to the world that you are nothing but a traitor." Paragon Rizel extinguished his essence fire with a thought, the crushing weight and cutting edge dissipating as his sword cooled to normal temperature in his grip. He regarded the fallen soldier with something almost like respect, saying quietly, "Your courage is commendable, but your death would serve no purpose." The young soldier tried to rise, managed only to lift himself on one trembling arm. "Then why?" he demanded, blood staining his lips. "Why betray everything we stood for?" Burning Storm sheathed his blade, his emerald eyes unreadable. "Young soldier, I never betrayed anything. What you see as the great vision today started with mere childhood fantasies of Dante and I, being descendants of Ghafer, the only ones that inherited the purpose and mandate. Dante was the one who betrayed that vision." A little pain flashed across his face. "This was never our vision. Destruction was never included." He turned away from the defeated soldier, continuing his purposeful march toward the complex that now bore scars of their battle. Behind him, the young paragon slumped to the ground, consciousness fading as his essence reserves depleted entirely. Chapter 932. What is the justification of a cause? Part 1. Burning Storm trudged toward the complex's fountain, his boots heavy against the shattered ground. His weighted steps betrayed his exhaustion from the recent battle, visible only to the keen observer who might notice the slight drag in his otherwise purposeful stride. He circled the fountain, its once delicate design barely clinging to existence, as if the world itself had taken a blade and cleaved it cleanly down the middle. On the balcony above, a figure stood leaning against the railing. Despite the great structure being split in two, it remained upright, though a deep groove scarred its massive form. The man on the balcony seemed unconcerned by the damage, simply watching as Burning Storm approached with measured steps. Black hair with streaks of white danced like silk ribbons in the gentle breeze as the sun sank beneath the horizon, casting a cantaloupe glow across the ravaged landscape. Even the sun appeared eager to hide from the devastation that would surely follow when two dangerous paragons clashed. Paragon Rizel tilted his chin upward, raising his hand in a half-hearted wave. "Seriously, you still lack a sense of surprise. All this charade for a welcome party. And the party wasn't even difficult. Your men fell like autumn leaves." The man on the balcony shifted his gaze to the young soldier sprawled unconscious on the ground. He scoffed, his expression returning to its usual cold indifference. Burning Storm, such an exemplary drifter. A smile crept across his face, cold as winter frost. "Ah, if Riemgard did not exist, I'm certain you'd be the strongest paragon in all the Central Plains. You've grasped the core of your true name and the thread connecting it to your soul with remarkable depth. Most drifters these days are too lazy for such dedication." He eased away from the railing, fingers tapping a soft rhythm against the metal. "You managed to release your will upon the physical realm without fully manifesting your essence. Defeating a paragon without essence manifestation is an impossible feat, yet you make it look like child's play. Burning Storm tilted his face skyward, a wry grin splitting his lips. You're just going to sing my praises? TSK. You truly are formidable. Damn. Acknowledging it again makes the reality of your strength hit me like a hammer. His voice faded to a whisper, which makes me grateful for my meticulous planning. Paragon Ryzel fixed him with an unwavering stare, barely containing the inferno of rage smoldering in the depths of his emerald eyes. A heartbeat passed before his voice thundered forth, each word a seismic tremor through the air. Dante, where is my wife? A maniacal grin sliced across Lieutenant Dante's face. Despite the smile, he radiated an arctic menace as he shrugged with calculated indifference. She's quite stubborn, that one, clinging to life by threads, yet still refusing to give me what I seek. Ryzel's face transformed into a tempest of fury. Dante, if anything happens to my woman, killing you will not be enough. Dante arched an eyebrow before curling his lips with contempt. Oh please, after everything you've endured in Lithia and here, you're nothing but a walking corpse. You think you can even scratch me? Even if you summoned your essence manifestation, it would be pitiful. You've already drained yourself, releasing your will upon the world. His gaze pierced the paragon like ice shards. Your body might never know fatigue because of your talent's nature, but your essence pool is as finite as anyone else's. And when it runs dry, you become more vulnerable than the weakest among us. Ryzel glared up at his former friend, hatred blazing in his eyes. Lieutenant Dante wasn't wrong. In fact, he struck devastatingly close to the truth. Despite his reluctance to tap his essence reserves, Ryzel had done just that. What happened in Lithia had forced his hand, and the 11-hour flight here had drained him further. A paragon's essence pool might appear bottomless to outsiders, but paragons themselves knew the cruel reality of its limits. In this case, the situation grew dire because Dante's particular talent made him a nightmare opponent for Ryzel specifically. In essence manifestation, Dante wielded phantasmal forces of echo, an ability to replicate his own attacks or those of his enemies in devastating cascades. Fighting someone like him with essence manifestation spelled doom under normal circumstances. Attempting it while essence depleted was suicide. Yet Burning Storm allowed none of these fears to betray themselves on his weathered face. Instead, he scowled at the lieutenant. Spare me the lecture. You've never bested me in the past 20 years. Weakened or not, I'll make you quake before I'm done. Lieutenant Dante's expression twisted with visible contempt. He swung his legs, shattering the balcony railing. Stone fragments exploded in every direction like shrapnel. Walking the length of the broken railing, he launched himself into the air. A leap that defied physics, covering large distance before cratering the ground mere feet from Burning Storm. Ryzel, must we walk this path? Think about it, the dream we shared as innocent children. I've never abandoned it. I've clung to that vision with stubborn devotion. If anything, serving in the government strengthened my resolve, opened my eyes to the necessity of disciplined evil in this world. It showed me the wisdom in Gafares' vision. Compassion threaded through his voice like silk. You remember, don't you? Our childhood debates? You once argued Gafare was justified in his actions. You said that while many perished, his cause birthed an age that far outweighed the cost. People die every day, whether for noble causes or simple mortality. Death never ceases. People understood their death and followed Gafare anyway. He paused, boring into his friend's eyes with an expression shadowed by melancholy. You taught me these truths, Ryzel. What changed you? What happened to the man who showed me the way? Why are you becoming everything you despised? Why are you growing weak? Why are you becoming like your father? Ryzel didn't flinch, but something flickered behind his eyes. An ache, old and buried. He took a single step forward, each movement deliberate as granite. His voice emerged calm, yet a storm writhed beneath its surface. Indeed, I was a fool once. I thought logic alone could justify sacrifice. that the dead were merely numbers in our grand equation. His gaze locked with Dante's, unyielding, sorrowful. I told myself Gaffer was right, that the future demanded blood as its price, that we were architects of tomorrow, not executioners of today. His breath came sharp, ragged. But then I watched my father sign away the lives of an entire city like it was ink on parchment. No regret, no hesitation, and I realized he had become blind to everything but his vision. Reisel's fists clenched at his sides. He stopped seeing people, mothers, children, men begging for one more sunrise. And I was marching down that same blood-soaked road. Dante scoffed, but Reisel pressed on without pause. Then she found me. His voice softened, dropping into reverence. She taught me that every soul carries weight, that the true strength of a dream lies in the hands it uplifts, not the ones it crushes beneath its heel. His eyes blazed, not with rage, but with unshakable conviction. She made me see what we never could, Dante, that even a single life remains worth fighting for if it means preserving our humanity. Dante's face darkened like thunderclouds gathering. His jaw tightened into stone. She made you soft. A smile tugged at Reisel's lips, gentle as morning light. No, she made me see. For the first time in my cursed existence, I looked upon the world and wept for its beauty. Chapter 933. What is the justification of a cause? Part 2. Dante tilted his head. So let me get this straight, Reisel. You left me, betrayed the people because you fell in love. Paragon Reisel smiled softly. His face was pale and dark. That's a wholesome way to put it, Dante. But I never left you. I had always been with you. What we believed in was monstrous. Monstrosity is what saves the world. Reisel, we need monsters to reshape this world. Dante's voice cracked like thunder. Monsters grow everywhere. Whether for a just cause or a greedy one, there are monsters all around us. And they don't walk around with hideous skins and vicious fangs. They look like you and me, Rai. They look like you and me. His face turned darker, fiercer. He stepped forward, his focus laser-sharp on Paragon Reisel. His hands cut through the air as he spoke. You tell me, Rai, tell me, who's going to save us from ourselves when the strangest ones among us delude themselves with righteousness? You want to retain your humanity. His lip curled. That's rather selfish of you. He paused. His dark gaze grew darker. His lips pressed together as a subtle, dangerous light began to dance in the depths of his eyes. You know what? I've always known. I've always known you were selfish. You think only of yourself, and when you fell in love with Lyri, you became even more selfish. Don't sell me stupid stories about retaining humanity. Now that you have something to lose, you restrain yourself, you tame the monster you've always been. You claim you left the government because you couldn't stomach the evil your father continued to allow. You hated yourself when you were with him, felt trapped, needed liberation. So you took a leap. Dante's breath came shaky, his voice threatening to tremble. At the time, I tried to understand you. Veiled Light was a greedy man, after all. He was the kind of person who didn't let the government prosper, weak, greedy, and wicked. I understood your sentiments and supported them. In fact, I was optimistic. Since you were an ascendant and I was merely a savant, I was optimistic that you'd perhaps finally begin to move forward the greater vision we've always shared. But there was nothing from you. He chuckled dryly and continued. But I took no offense. You were quite the forgetful man after all. I took no offense. Instead, I worked something out. I worked hard and finally became an ascendant, only to hear that you had become a paragon. You were finally at that point of power where you could seize hold of our vision and begin making it real. His voice dropped to a somber chord. But there was nothing, Rai. Nothing. He chuckled again. I made every excuse in the world for you. Eventually became a paragon myself. After months and months of hunting your location, I came to you, spoke to you, and asked you to join me. Reisel Verstrid, you declined me. At this point, Dante burned with rage. His eyes widened like wildfire. He narrowed them, tilting his head like a demented psychopath. And now you speak to me of the beauty of the world, of retaining your humanity, of meeting her. She's a dog to those old fools. For crying out loud. Paragon Rizel's expression changed. His facial features remained unchanged, but a subtle, dangerous light kindled in the depths of his eyes, perfectly mirroring the tangible danger that Dante's own had posed just seconds ago, even though he was weakened at the moment. Paragon Rizel was like a wounded alpha wolf. One might think him vulnerable with how battered he appeared, but the look in his eyes was that of a ruthless murderer who would let nothing go unkilled. You obviously have a few bones to pick. Pick them with me. Leave my wife out of this. Lieutenant Dante stared at him impassively for several seconds. Then he sighed, slipping his hands into his pocket and drawing out a fat cigar and a strange flame sparker that looked elegant to hold. Dante lit the cigar and extended his hand gently to Paragon Rizel. Want some? Paragon Rizel exhaled and shook his head. I'm currently in rehab. Dante nodded, his lips turning downward. Let me guess. Leary. Paragon Rizel's silence was all the answer Dante needed. You know, I always knew she was your problem. Too bold, too outspoken for a powerless human. She has a way with words. She's cunning. She could make an assassin sent to kill her protect her instead. Paragon Rizel smiled softly. Even though Dante didn't seem to be praising Leary, those were all the words he heard. Well, Leary is quite diplomatic. Did she manage to convince you not to kill her? Dante scoffed. The only reason she's alive is because I've been waiting for you. Paragon Rizel didn't need the exact words to know that his wife had indeed worked her charm. His beautiful wife had gone ahead and done her thing. She'd almost convinced him, after all, into not loving her. She's a devious one, that girl. Lieutenant Dante stared at his friend with a dark grimace. A second later, he asked, Did I say something funny? Paragon Rizel scoffed. No need to be so uptight. Even if it's the end of the world, I'll still laugh. You have my wife and unborn child in your hands. You probably thought, and knew, this was the only way to get to me, the only way to kill me. What you want is my death, isn't it? Then let me see my wife for the last time. He studied Lieutenant Dante's face. I've not really been a good father-to-be, you know, and the little time I have left, you obviously want to snatch that away. Isn't it right that I bid my family a satisfying farewell? The lieutenant curled his lips in disgust. It's really irritating to see what you've become, Rai. To see how that woman has weakened you. He closed his eyes, stopping all words for the moment. Then he slowly opened them and rested one hand on the sword strapped to his waist. Lieutenant Dante's hair swayed softly in the wind. Slowly, gently, he began to open an eye he had never opened before. At least not since he became a paragon. Chapter 934. A guy obsessed with the sword. Byran stood lazily, leaning against a light pole with his hands folded. He watched with nonchalant eyes as all the soldiers who had been stationary began changing. Their faces twisted, their skin reddening as if they'd caught some deviously vicious rash. Their eyes blackened like liquid pools of darkness, and they began to move forward, at first with sluggish, irritating movements. The Sword King didn't have to repel them deliberately. All he gave them was a dirty slap that threw them off balance. The main boy, however, was nowhere to be found. He'd suddenly vanished, dissipating into black toxic smoke that dispersed among all the soldiers. It was after he dispersed that they began to act differently, losing control of themselves to something vile. All their focus was on Byran. They flew forward, their talent abilities flaring to life. Flames ignited, thunder crackled. Even the wind seemed to create an oscillation around one soldier's hand. All of them were directed toward Byran. Yet he didn't seem bothered in the slightest. Byran exhaled and yanked the light pole free with minimal force. He swung the tall pole around, destroying everything within reach. The spin generated a great cyclone that pushed them all back. Byran positioned the pole forward, bending his legs slightly and narrowing his eyes to a sharp, eagle-like focus. Moonlit whisper, scholar's reversal. The scene was quite a funny, astonishing, and unusually disturbing sight. Byran took a delicate step forward, gently holding and hurling the pole in an intricate pattern that seemed ill-suited for such a weapon, if it could even be called that. The pole moved as if it belonged, blending seamlessly with his movements. The entire air rippled solemnly like the surface of still, perfect water. Then, in the next second, blood surged viciously from the soldiers' bodies as they were all suddenly suspended in the air by a wicked and seemingly mystical force. Byran moved between them, taking his time as he guided the enormous, unwieldy pole with one hand. The pole flew across several monsters, slicing through them with wicked impossibility. The scene was incredibly disturbing. The soldiers died grotesquely, their eyes wide open. Even the buildings received scars from the terrific sword technique. Deep grooves in the earth stretched forward like disaster paths, connecting and slanting up building walls. The problem was that even as they died, immersed in their own pool of blood, they kept standing up. More were upon him. Their talents threw measly abilities at him, which he blocked with the pole he wielded or simply vanished out of the way to avoid. His movement seemed erratic, but it was deliberate. Byran shifted and glided through the undying people with precision, ruthlessly mangling their bodies with the pole. All of them bent in crude ways, to the point where he was having just a little trouble restraining himself. The way he wreaked such havoc made him want to wreak even more, perhaps unleash the full extent of his power, but the Sword King felt that was far beneath him. They kept coming over and over again, jumping at him, which eventually forced his hand. He extended 2 fingers and shot forward. He'd press them into their bodies and cause confusion until they suddenly gained life back, only to die again. To put it simply, the way he'd helped Paragon Rizel heal his hand was by making the hand remember it had always belonged, commanding it to belong. The way he could transform into a bird was by deluding his body into thinking it had always been a bird, commanding it to belong. Hence, he transformed into a bird. With the falling bodies now, all he did was cause them to remember what they had always been. This helped the real owners of the bodies find their way back into control. However, if they'd been ruthlessly killed before, they fell to the ground powerlessly and died the moment they gained control of themselves. This went on for a while, with the Sword King standing in one position and wielding only 2 fingers. Eventually, many lay around him, permanently dead, while others reeled back in confusion. The Sword King himself stood with an impassive gaze, seemingly unimpressed by what anyone would watch with heavenly reverence. Finally, the black mist that had flowed into people began to flow out, as though it had been fully ejected. Actually, it had, because what Byran did was force it out of where it didn't belong. The Sword King's will, though very subtle, was far stronger than the young and new Paragon's essence manifestation and undying abilities. The boy grimaced, trembling with a pale, sweating face as his effort failed woefully. He staggered back, trembling and stretching forth his hand. Hua, Ryu? Byran tilted his head and shrugged nonchalantly. Just a guy obsessed with swords. The soldier extended his hand and shouted in defiance, trembling. It's impossible. Are you a paragon? I've never heard of a paragon like you. Where do you belong? Where do you come from? He was right. Aside from matters within the Empire of Riemgard and the sudden appearance of these new paragons, there were only 5 paragons in the whole of the Central Plains. 3 of them were Dante, Rizel, and Rufsburg. Of the remaining 2, one was the headmaster of the strongest citadel in the Central Plains, while the last was the clan patriarch of the Kageyama clan. These last 2 weren't active in the world, although the legend of their names still carried such fearsome effect that if they were to be active somewhere or make any significant movement, the entire continent would tremble with devastating consequences. They were so powerful that every single one of their decisions influenced the flow of things, especially since both were heads of very powerful organizations themselves. The young soldier was absolutely certain that none of them were here. So who was this strange paragon fighting him like he was fighting a child? Could he even be called a paragon? To him, Byran seemed far stronger. He hadn't even taken the battle seriously, and this was the result. He wielded a pole as a sword, clearly not even considering things seriously. taking the boy for a joke. The boy wanted to run, but then again he was infuriated, consumed by anger. He wanted to make a difference, make this strange man start taking him seriously. A wry grin slowly crept upon his face. You'll need to start getting serious from here on. Since you've forced my hand, don't complain, stranger. Chapter 935, 300,000 strike in different swords, all in one strike. Byron's eyes remained fixed ahead, his face carved from stone. The young soldier's words might as well have been wind whistling through empty branches. They left no mark on him. The soldier had already raised his trembling hand, light bleeding from his fingertips as he carved a rune of light into the air. Sweat beaded his forehead, mixing with the steady trickle of blood seeping from his nose. Each movement looked like he was trying to lift a mountain with his bare hands. Above them, reality tore apart. A shimmering blue wound opened behind the demented soldier, its edges spreading like a ripple in still water. The earth itself seemed to hold its breath as something vast began to emerge from within. Byron's eyes became slits. Northern had suspected the truth all along. That strange rift in Lithia had been no accident. His master's instincts had been sharp as ever. Someone out there possessed the key to opening rifts, and they were passing it down to these human whelps like a family heirloom. How they managed it remained a mystery to Byron. These portals that vomited out monsters hadn't existed in his time. Back then, monsters had been woven into the fabric of their world like the sun and moon. Hadn't they? His brow furrowed as the memories shifted like sand beneath his thoughts. The questions fell away as the creature began to reveal itself. First came the stench, thick and choking, like a battlefield left to rot under the summer sun. Death itself seemed to pour from the rift, coating the air in invisible filth. Byron muttered, though the words barely captured the putrid reality. The smell of death. Power radiated from the beast like heat from a forge. Each footstep sent shockwaves through the ground, announcing its arrival with the force of a small earthquake. This was no ordinary demon. This was something that should have sent entire armies running for the hills. The soldier stood his ground despite trembling legs. Paragon, perhaps, but still just human. Still breakable. The pieces clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. Someone handed this to him, along with those other tricks up his sleeve. The soldier's talent had become clear during their brief dance. The impure and simple art of death. Immortality that bent like a willow in the wind, never quite breaking, no matter how hard the storm blew. The man had been stealing body parts like a child stealing sweets, using others as his personal flesh market. And those slaps Byron had delivered, each one powerful enough to crack boulders, had barely left lasting marks. The soldier's body was like putty, reshaping itself after every blow, an infuriating mockery of mortality. The creature's legs crashed down like falling trees, each step sending tremors through the earth as it emerged with the bearing of an ancient king. A living mountain of flesh and calm fury, the creature moved among the buildings as if they were mere saplings in its path. Its legs, massive pillars carved from primordial stone, groaned beneath moss-covered hide that seemed to pulse with its own verdant life. Hidden deep within its skull, the creature's eyes peered out like forgotten stars. They had witnessed eons pass, held wisdom older than memory. Yet now they reflected nothing but the hollow stare of death itself. From either side of its trunk, curved tusks jutted into the air like scythe blades forged by titans. Each one could reduce a city block to rubble with a single sweep, turning stone and steel into dust with casual indifference. Moss clung to every inch of its body, transforming the monster into a walking ecosystem, a mountain that breathed and moved with terrible purpose. Even Byron, with all his accumulated power, felt something cold settle in his stomach at the sight. What force could fell something this ancient? The soldier before him was a gnat compared to this behemoth. No mere human could have brought down such a titan and lived to brag about it. Someone had done the killing and gifted this walking nightmare as the soldier's ace in the hole. Byron's lips curved into a grim smile. Time to get serious. His fingers found Dark Mortal's hilt, and for a heartbeat, he closed his eyes. When they opened, They burned with the light of a predator who had just found worthy prey. Dark sparks danced across his outstretched palm before condensing into solid steel, a yellow odachi that pulsed with lightning as it materialized. He strapped it to his waist, creating a deadly constellation of blades. Another gesture, and a silver whisper of metal appeared in his grip. Illusioned Hefter balanced across his shoulders like a sleeping serpent as his ice-blue eyes tracked the lumbering giant. 3 swords would dance tonight. He extended one leg forward, muscles coiling like springs. With practiced ease, he clamped Illusioned Hefter's grip between his teeth, then drew Stainless and Dark Mortal in smooth, deadly arcs. Triple steel gleamed in the dying light as Byron's eyes became chips of winter frost, their gaze dropping the temperature around him by degrees. Even the air seemed to shiver in anticipation of the coming storm. The sun was sinking and darkness was descending upon the world. With that cold dread permeated the air, there was something strange, something primal, something different, something suffocating. Byron's upper body coiled like a drawn bow. Then his eyes erupted with celestial fury. Blue light exploded from his gaze, unfurling into luminous wings that carved themselves from pure radiance. He moved, or perhaps the world moved around him. In the space between heartbeats, Byron ceased to exist in place. A hair-thin trail of azure light marked his passage, the ghost trace of movement too swift for mortal eyes to capture, stretching across the behemoth's form like lightning captured in glass. The line zigzagged with surgical precision, carving patterns through air and flesh alike, up, down, across, creating a deadly geometric puzzle over the ancient mountain's living hide. Reality held its breath. Then came the shockwave. It tore outward 3 times like creation's first explosion, the mere displaced air reducing stone walls to memory and buildings to scattered dust. Following those impossible lines, the colossal beast began its swan song. Flesh parted along the traced paths, the body toppling in sections like a mountain range being carved apart by a god's blade wielded with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. When the dust settled, Byron stood exactly where he had begun, as if he had never moved at all. Illusioned Hefter slipped from between his teeth, clattering to the ground with a metallic whisper. He straightened from his crouch, rolling his neck until vertebrae popped in a cascade of satisfied cracks, releasing the battle tension like water from a dam. The destruction spread beyond the estate's borders. Fugal itself trembled beneath the aftershock, the ground rippling in waves that split the earth into spiderweb fractures. Cracks raced across the city like seeking fingers, crawling over walls and through streets, an unstoppable network of destruction that honored no boundaries. The cursed veins of shattered stone spread without mercy, transforming the city's foundation into a mosaic of broken earth that spoke of power beyond mortal comprehension. Chapter 936. Aftermath. What appeared as a single strike was, in truth, a symphony of destruction that made the world itself convulse. Byron was a master swordsman, but the depth of his mastery, that revelation sent shockwaves through reality itself. In one fluid motion, he had moved and swung 300,000 strikes simultaneously. Each blade, Dark Mortal, Stainless, and Illusioned Hefter, carved 100,000 paths through air and flesh in the same heartbeat. All 100,000 strikes compressed into one razor-thin line so sharp it severed the fabric of existence, if only for a moment so brief that reality never noticed the wound. This was Byron's peak, or perhaps just a glimpse of what he once was. Granted that his memory and technique had fled him like smoke through fingers, yet what remained was enough to reshape the world. Enough to kill an apex behemoth in a single breath. Enough to swing 300,000 strikes with such precision that each followed its predecessor's path like a shadow. The technique didn't just fracture every building in Fugal, it carved them into monuments of destruction. Thousands of sword marks scored every wall, as if countless duels had raged for centuries within each stone. Every living thing caught in that moment simply ceased to be, atomized by the shockwave before they could even register the blade's passage. The initial explosion wasn't from steel meeting flesh. It was 300,000 strikes compressing into themselves, creating a singularity of violence that tore through space like a hungry beast. Time itself bent beneath the weight of such focused destruction. The moment the strikes coalesced folded into the moment they tore through the monster, creating a strange temporal echo where cause and effect danced together. The secondary effects rippled outward like aftershocks of an earthquake. Tremors raced through Fugal's foundations and beyond, spreading cracks like spider webs across the earth. In the surrounding forest, trees swayed as ancient instincts drove creatures into panicked flight, their primitive minds screaming warnings that predators of a different order now walked the world. The behemoth's corpse crashed through buildings like toppling dominoes, bringing final destruction to the estate. Then silence, thick and absolute, descended over the graveyard of a battlefield. Everyone was gone, erased from existence before their minds could process their final moments. Even the young soldier who had orchestrated this entire dance with death. Such a waste. He never got to witness the sublime artistry he'd forced from Byron's blades. Byron's shoulders rose and fell in dismissal. It's no surprise. Only one person has ever. The thought trailed into fragments. Someone had watched him fight at this level before, but their face swam beyond memory's reach, leaving only bitter aftertaste on his tongue. His gaze swept the devastation. Buildings lay in ruins, some reduced to mountain-sized heaps of rubble, others simply gone as if they'd never existed. 3 massive chunks of stone flesh had become part of the landscape now. The behemoth's body merged with earth and edifice, its strange essence already beginning to transform the estate into something different, wild, as if the creature's death was seeding new terrain with alien nature. The Sword King wandered empty streets that moments ago had buzzed with soldiers' grueling voices. Now not even a single boot or belt buckle remained to mark their passing. He hawked and spat, the sound harsh in the unnatural quiet. Spineless idiots. The battle raging before the government's unification complex was a catastrophe given form. Craters gouged the earth like wounds from titanic hammers, while 2 figures painted streaks of green and red light across the devastated landscape. They moved beyond sight. The eye could only catch their afterimages, twin comets leaving destruction in their wake. Reality itself groaned beneath the weight of their clashes. Each impact threatened to crack the world's foundations, sending shockwaves that turned solid matter into memory. The ornate fountain, once the complex's crowning jewel, disintegrated when Burning Storm's kick connected with Lieutenant Dante. Compressed vile force exploded on impact, reducing carved stone to sand that scattered like a dying breath. Dante tumbled through the devastation, his body grinding a furrow through the earth as momentum carried him through the complex's wall. He emerged moments later, water dripping from his face, only to charge back into the fray with renewed fury. The battle escalated beyond mere combat. Each exchange became heavier, more destructive, not for the paragons who danced their deadly waltz, but for everything caught in their orbit. The complex walls cracked under ambient pressure. The estate grounds trembled with sympathetic destruction. 2 of Central Plains' known paragons were tearing each other, and everything else apart. Despite bone-deep fatigue, Paragon Rizel matched Lieutenant Dante's every strike with desperate precision. Dante commanded Echo with devastating mastery. Each sword swing rippled into 10 ghostly afterstrikes that carved through air and stone alike. Terror incarnate moved through Dante's blade. Every cut held enough power to split mountains, and receiving 10 such blows simultaneously had pushed Rizel to the edge of despair more times than he cared to count. The steel never touched his flesh, but the weight of each echoing strike crushed him like avalanches. Burning Storm had wrapped himself in layers of momentum, creating a shield that nullified most physical attacks. The technique worked, but its potency had diminished. He could thicken the momentum barriers until nothing, not even the crushing weight of Dante's strikes, could penetrate, but that would burn through his essence reserves too quickly. He needed to match blow for blow or risk collapse. Dante, by contrast, moved with the casual energy of someone barely breaking a sweat. Despite Burning Storm's labored breathing and desperate defenses, Rizel knew his opponent was still holding back. The man had been using only his echo ability since the battle began, a fraction of his true arsenal. Then reality shattered. A shockwave tore across the landscape with apocalyptic force, its howling wind carrying the promise of annihilation. Both paragons braced for impact. They far surpassed ordinary humans or drifters in resilience, but this was different. The force struck like an angry god's fist. Both warriors were launched backward, weightless dolls flung apart by invisible hands. In the split second before his body went sailing, Rizel's eyes found the unification complex. His hand traced desperate patterns, coating the building in a wind shield woven from momentum itself. The barrier saved the structure from collapsing, but couldn't protect its glass. Windows exploded in a symphony of shattering crystal, their destruction painting the air with glittering shards that caught the dying light. Chapter 937. Rai vs. Dan Part 1. Fear painted both their faces the same deathly pale. Their eyes swept the devastation, hunting for the source of that world-shaking force. Burning Storm, however, had already pieced together the truth. His expression softened into a smile, but not his usual radiant grin. This one carried the weight of exhaustion and something darker, like watching a storm approach from the horizon. Dante's face twisted into a grimace at the sight. "What is that? What have you done?" His voice dripped accusation. His gaze snapped toward the center where massive stone corpses lay, the behemoth that his subordinate Neosis had summoned, only to watch it vanish beneath power that defied comprehension. The mystery gnawed at him. He couldn't identify the force, couldn't even guess at its nature, which left him reeling with confusion. And worse, infinitely worse, was that damned smile on Rizel's face. Burning Storm's expression held secrets Dante couldn't crack, and it infuriated him. Paragon Rizel merely shrugged, his soft smile remaining infuriatingly intact. "What did I do? Nothing at all. I simply brought a friend who might render all your schemes worthless. Oh, and a disciple too, though he's sleeping at the moment. Things will become far more interesting when he wakes. Apparently, you two have already met." Dante's frown deepened into something ugly. "If you have time for taking disciples, you must have had plenty to spare. Meanwhile, I've been bleeding sweat for our vision. The same vision we once shared." His words hung in the air before bitterness overtook him. "What am I even doing, trying to reason with you? You've chosen your path. Your friend, your disciple, none of it matters. You're all going to die. Every last one of you." Lieutenant Dante straightened, neck bones popping as he rolled his shoulders. His fist clenched until knuckles went white. Then his fingers wrapped around his sword's grip with deadly intent. He stepped forward, measuring the distance. 13 meters separated them. Perfect striking range. Dante's hand moved with deliberate slowness, pushing the black coat from his shoulders. The garment fell like a judgment. When it struck the ground, the impact shattered stone as if woven from lead rather than fabric. Cracks spiderwebbed outward, the earth protesting beneath the weight of something not meant for mortal realms. Paragon Rizel's eyes tracked the coat's descent, his throat working against a sudden dryness. When he looked back at Dante, understanding dawned cold and terrible. "You've opened your eyes, dropped all limits on your speed." His voice carried quiet recognition. "You must be serious about killing me." He swayed slightly, regarding the sword in his grip as if seeing it for the first time. "Perhaps conserving my strength against you was folly from the start. This is a fight I must fully embrace." Melancholy colored each word, bitterness seeping through like blood through bandages. The reality before him was as inevitable as sunset, and just as final. Burning Storm was accepting what could not be changed. The sorrow of it sat heavy in the air between them. With quiet resignation, he opened his fingers. The sword slipped free, its fall ending in a metallic whisper as steel kissed stone. Crimson smoke swirled around Rizel like a living shroud, his eyes igniting with emerald fire that burned cold as winter stars. His skin darkened and expanded, shadows stretching across the ruined land like reaching fingers. The ground split beneath the assault of two colossal limbs crashing down, debris exploding skyward as Paragon Rizel completed his transformation. He had become something else entirely. A hulking behemoth that merged primal fury with earthbound power, wrapped in a hide of seething crimson fur that bristled with barely contained rage. Muscles flowed beneath his thick coat like living geology, each movement carrying the weight of shifting continents. His massive limbs pressed against the earth with inexorable force, pulverizing stone beneath his hooves as if the ground itself recoiled from his presence. Twin horns spiraled from his skull, jagged as mountain peaks, ancient as erosion itself. They framed a face carved from volcanic rock, all hard edges and deadly intent. Beneath his beetled brow, emerald eyes blazed with intelligence far beyond mere beast. Something ancient, bitter, and painfully aware. Burning Storm's breath came in thunderous snorts that scalded the air around him, each exhale a promise of destruction. Lieutenant Dante tilted his head back, meeting the ancient gaze without flinching. His lips curved into a half-smile that held no warmth. Burning Storm, an essence manifestation that truly reflects the man within. The transformed beast advanced with deliberate slowness, each step of his hooves leaving smoking craters in the earth. Heat radiated from his passage, searing the ground beneath like brands from a hellish forge. He halted halfway between them, his voice resonating like thunder trapped in stone. "This is the end for you, Dan." Dante's chin lifted in defiance. "The end, Rai." They moved as one. The earth disappeared beneath them as both paragons launched into battle. They didn't simply disappear. Such a mundane word couldn't capture their violent departure from reality. They tore through space itself, leaving only devastation in their wake. Dante's blade struck first, a comet's tail of obsidian light slicing horizontally with surgical precision. The steel sang through the void where Rizel had been, carving a canyon through stone, air, and the very fabric of physics. Reality screamed at the violation. Rizel had already circled behind. His massive hoof crashed downward like judgment itself. Dante contorted, barely escaping the impact that obliterated the landscape below. Molten rock and fire fountained skyward, painting the air with destruction. His abandoned coat whipped through the storm like a phantom. Each of Rizel's strikes carried mountain-breaking force. His hooves could shatter fortifications, his horns cleave bedrock. Yet Dante, still mortal flesh and bone, met him blow for blow. The human warrior slipped beneath a devastating sweep, his blade scoring a smoking line across crimson hide. The beast's growl wasn't pain but recognition, a sound that rippled outward, sending distant trees swaying and birds fleeing as mere shadows against the sky. Rizel's horn jabbed downward like a bolt of divine wrath, and Dante caught it on his blade. Sparks erupted between them, hissing, spitting fury that painted the air with dragon's breath. The impact catapulted him backward. Dante twisted midair with feline grace, feet finding purchase on a crumbling pillar before he launched himself forward with explosive force. He became pure speed incarnate. Dante materialized above Rizel, his blade drinking in the darkness around it, trailing arcs of shadow as it plunged toward the beast's exposed neck. But the massive creature defied his own bulk, pivoting with liquid precision, presenting his shoulder to meet the descending steel. Chapter 938. Rai vs. Dan Part 2. Steel met what should have been flesh, but wasn't. The blade skidded instead. A metallic shriek split the air as Dante's sword scraped against Rizel's shoulder. Not flesh but living flame wrapped in momentum's armor. The strike didn't cleave clean. It dragged, flinging sparks and embers like scattered stars as it carved a shallow groove across hide transformed into molten defense. The beast had become a walking furnace. Rizel rolled with the impact, converting execution into glancing wound. Flames erupted along his hide, racing up his mane and horns like fire given hunger and consciousness. Dante's feet barely touched ground before retaliation came. A hoof swept horizontally. Not a downward crush but a sweeping scythe that cleaved the horizon. The force alone demolished buildings half a mile distant. Dante dove beneath the arc, the heat boiling moisture from his skin as he escaped death by a hair's breadth. He emerged from the roll already striking, sword seeking the vulnerable joint behind Rizel's knee, a seam in the molten armor. Steel found its mark, penetrated, but the hide responded with fury. Flames exploded outward from the wound, meeting steel with steam that screamed like a dying god. Dante jerked back, vision blurring as fire raced up his blade toward his grip, threatening to consume flesh along with metal. Rizel surged forward. A shoulder crash, no finesse, just crushing mass behind impossible speed. Connected with Dante's center mass. Flesh met molten fury and surrendered. Dante launched skyward, tumbling through air like broken pottery. His body carved ravines in the earth, bouncing once, twice, before colliding with a stone wall that swallowed him in a cloud of debris. Rizel thundered after him. His hooves left burning prints on the ground, blackening soil and vaporizing rock. Each exhale birthed flame. Each stride proclaimed dominion over the crumbling world. Dante crawled from the wreckage, spitting crimson. His uniform hung in charred tatters. At least 2 ribs sat at wrong angles beneath his skin. Yet his fingers still clutched steel. The beast's eyes locked onto him. Not mindless rage, but something older, calculating, merciless. Rizel drew breath, and his flames intensified, shifting from orange to white-hot soulfire that bent the air with its heat. He charged again. The earth split beneath his assault. Dante vanished, a blur, then nothing. He reappeared along Rizel's flank, blade extended like a predator's claw. The upward slash should have split any creature from hip to shoulder. But Rizel embraced the strike. Let the blade rake across his hide. Let steel meet living fire and fail to find flesh. Then his tail swept around. The appendage struck like a battering ram forged by angry gods. Air fled the world as Dante crashed through 2 trees before meeting a boulder that exploded on impact. Yet, impossibly, he rose. Blood streamed from his scalp. One eye puffed shut, ribs grinding agony with each labored breath. But his speed hadn't diminished. If anything, it transcended. Dante blurred again, cutting a low arc across the scorched earth. Sparks erupted from his boots as his blade found Rizel's thigh, biting deeper this time. A grunt rumbled from the beast. Instant retaliation. Twin horns descended like judgment made manifest. Dante released his sword. He leapt, seizing Rizel's horn with both hands. Using the horn as an anchor, he swung around the beast's momentum, redirecting tons of charging mass, then drove his heel into Rizel's skull with bone-crushing force. The creature stumbled, only fractionally, but it was an opening. Dante touched down, reclaimed his blade in one fluid sweep, and pivoted upward, driving steel toward Rizel's jaw. Contact. Sparks exploded. Metal shrieked against bone. The sword carved a channel but couldn't penetrate. Rizel's roar erupted, not agony, but awakening fury. Flame geysered from his back, a crimson tower reaching toward the heavens. Then Rizel struck. His jaws snapped shut with enough force to crack granite. Dante rolled clear by inches, leaving the beast's teeth to shatter stone where his skull had been moments before. Smoke engulfed them. Heat turned air into burning silk. Their arena had contracted to this crucible of fire and steel, where legend battled memory and velocity danced with the inevitable. Both warriors gasped for breath. One transformed into living flame. The other, painted in crimson, trembling, yet his lips curved in savage triumph. Rizel's eyes blazed with emerald fire as his voice crashed over the battlefield like distant thunder. Do you think you can kill me without using your talent abilities? You take me for a fool. Dante's smirk remained fixed in place. Who says killing you is all I want? You're a formidable paragon, Rizel. Fighting you is a privilege I savor with every drop of blood spilled. I will defeat you, and yes, maybe I'll need 1 or 2 talent abilities to do it. But right now, you're weakened. I doubt I'll need them at all. It's only a matter of time before your essence manifestation begins to collapse. He paused, casting a glance toward the Unification Complex, which stood impossibly intact despite the devastation surrounding them. Besides, you're shielding the city while fighting me. You've hamstrung yourself with so many disadvantages. You must really be prepared to die. Rizel's response rumbled forth like an approaching storm, shaking loose stones from nearby ruins. "I won't be dying today, Dan. Not now. Not anytime soon." The battle raged on. What followed wasn't silence. It was pressure incarnate. Like dwelling in a hurricane's eye, waiting for the world to tear itself apart. Rizal moved. Not a charge, a descent. His hoof fell like divine judgment. Dante vanished in a blur of desperate speed, but the impact atomized the ground beneath. Magma geysered upward through shattered stone, painting the sky in hellish red. Dante materialized on Rizal's burning spine. His boots skidded across hide that blazed like the surface of the sun, soles liquefying as he sprinted along the beast's back. Every stride a race against the fire that threatened to consume him alive. He launched skyward and plunged downward, blade aimed at Rizal's nape, steel seeking the heart of a god. The hide resisted. The sword penetrated, then shrieked in agony. Rizal bucked with explosive force, his entire frame convulsing. Dante rocketed into the air, his silhouette igniting as he spun helplessly earthward. He didn't impact, catching himself mid-flight with inhuman precision. He pivoted, shoulders guiding his rotation, and landed in a three-point stance. His blade drove into the earth, anchoring his controlled descent. Smoke billowed from his scorched back. His breathing rasped like air being dragged through a punctured bellows. Chapter 939. Rai vs. Dan Part 3. The battle between both paragons tore at the land. A destruction without effort, an unfair devastation. Both combatants, regardless of the disparity in size, moved with a terror that fractured the earth beneath them. Paragon Rizal's speed was blinding, uncatchable. His form whistled through the wind as he blurred past with devastating precision. The faster he moved, the more catastrophic his strikes became. When he unleashed his abilities, the effect on the surroundings worsened exponentially. Echo replicated his attacks, but Paragon Rizal's body, like a tempest incarnate, ferociously rebuffed everything that touched its hide, scattering attacks away with brutal indifference. Colossal gashes scarred buildings, shredding their structures and making them crumble. Deep grooves carved into the earth like ancient wounds, testimony to the power unleashed. The air filled with the cataclysmic symphony of destruction. Burning Storm's attacks proved most troublesome. He embodied raw power, his mere movement sending earthquakes rippling outward, causing stones to scatter and break free from one another. When the cutting property of the flames that burned on his back, like the manes of a prideful ruler, touched the scenery, it suffered. Yet the unification complex stood like an untouchable observer. Of course, the reason was none other than the ferocious beast of Burning Storm itself, lumbering through the land and leaving chaos in its wake. He collided with the seemingly tiny human, generating shockwaves that devastated wind, sky, and land alike. The entire estate looked as though whatever lay beneath the earth clawed desperately for freedom. The ground, heavily wounded and bleeding, bore thousands of cracks that crisscrossed everywhere. Chunks of stone lay broken, harvested from the shattered ground. Gaping holes marked where Dante had been crushed repeatedly. Even as the battle raged on, the very scenery seemed to strain under their might. As Dante hurtled toward Burning Storm, he divided into 7 different versions of himself, each one a glass reflecting the dull, cold light of night. He landed on cracked stone with the grace of a dying comet, heavy, inevitable, burning with finality. Each of the 7 mirrored versions followed suit, landing around Rizal in a perfect crescent. They moved in eerie unison, each one twitching with the same cold purpose, eyes gleaming with identical hatred. This was Dante's talent, deceptively simple yet profoundly complex. It mirrored the same technique he'd used against the young soldier moments ago. By enforcing his will upon reality itself, the first stage of essence manifestation. What should have been subtle had been pushed beyond conventional limits, just as Rizal had demonstrated. A paragon could stretch the boundaries of what was deemed possible. The secret lay hidden within their true name. It was about discovering the intricate relationship between one's true name, soul, and talent. The mental burden alone was staggering, compounded by the scarcity of records concerning true names. During the early devastation of Troell, when Ul first appeared, drifters guarded their true names jealously. Each one a cipher that revealed hints about their talents and, crucially, their weaknesses. Recording true names proved largely futile. No two were identical, just as no two talents mirrored each other perfectly. So the mystery remained where it belonged, with the drifters themselves. In those early ages, drifters faced horrors that drove them to newfound understanding. Those times had witnessed powers beyond even paragons, yet paradoxically, one might call this current era an age of peace. The heroes had sacrificed immeasurably to forge this better world. One such hero had ruled the Central Plains during the early stages of division. Later, as other paragons emerged, the Central Plains fractured into different nations and clans. Yet its center of power remained unshaken. This was hardly the moment for history lessons, but witnessing how Dante had also grasped the meaning of his true name, Rizel felt genuine gratitude warm his chest. He took comfort knowing he wasn't alone on this path. There was Ral too with his enigmatic servants. Soon, many formidable individuals would rise again across the Central Plains, and the Age of Heroes would return. While Dante's ability appeared to create clones, it was infinitely more sophisticated. He had fragmented himself across slivers of absolute motion, each copy not a mere duplicate, but a real moment pulled from alternate instants of intent. The storm beast growled low, emerald eyes narrowing. He saw it. He understood. These weren't illusions. They were choices, 7 different moments of Dante, materialized all at once, striking simultaneously from 7 futures that could all be real. And they moved. The first Dante blurred, sword flashing low at Rizel's tendon. Another swept in from behind, his blade reversing in grip to stab upward beneath the ribcage. A third leapt high, twisting midair for a descending overhead slash aimed at the beast's horned skull. Each Dante flawless, merciless, united. But Rizel was more than muscle and momentum. He stopped thinking, let instinct rule. With a roar that shattered the sky, he spun, his bulwark body accelerating beyond any perceivable rhythm. Crimson fire erupted outward, a whirlwind of soul-ignited momentum, so fast the wind couldn't keep up. The first Dante vanished, scattered like glass. The second ducked, but the shockwave still found him, hurling him into a wall that crumbled under the impact. Another dissolved in mid-lunge, his path intercepted by a tail wreathed in white-hot energy. Only 3 remained, and they struck. Blades connected. Will connected. This time, Rizel roared in pain. Real pain. One blade cut across his jaw. Another pierced just beneath the armpit. The third, Dante's true self, drove his sword into the shoulder, twisting deep and unleashing a surge of kinetic backlash that detonated from within the beast's body. Rizel staggered. The ground split again, stone recoiling beneath his hooves. But he did not fall. Instead, he hooked Dante with his curved horns, lunging forward with explosive ferocity. He reared up, building devastating momentum, then crashed downward, slamming Dante into the earth with the full weight of his skull behind the blow. The ground shattered at first impact, but Rizel did not relent. He roared ferociously, his voice soaring skyward as the heavens themselves darkened in response. A massive crater rippled outward as he smashed his head against the ground a second time. The third impact split the sky. Dante's body crumpled beneath the beast's horns, driven deeper into the yielding earth. Stone gave way to molten veins, dirt transmuted to steam, and the crater widened until it became a scar that had consumed the entire estate. And Rizel, burning storm, roared. His voice was not merely sound, but physical pressure. The sky peeled back. Clouds tore open like wounded cloth. Lightning dared not strike. It fled. Then silence, just for a breath. Rizel stood over the ruin, steam rising from his bestial body, heat waves bending the horizon around him. Then, his emerald eyes narrowed. He felt it, the shift in the atmosphere, and a pulse, a soundless throb that rattled his bones. A whisper not from Dante's mouth, but from the very seams of reality itself. Then the ground beneath Ryzel's hooves transmuted to crystal. Light erupted upward from the crater, pure and prismatic, scattering across the battlefield in radiant arcs. In that moment, Ryzel flinched, carrying his massive body through the air in a swift motion, as if borne aloft by the wind itself. He landed at a distance, unleashing a terrifying shockwave that rippled outward, further ravaging the already devastated landscape. Standing in the center of a circle of cracked and splintered ground, he observed the metamorphosis Dante was undergoing. It seemed, at last, the lieutenant had decided to unveil his essence manifestation. And Burning Storm watched with anticipation, eager to witness the true form of his best friend's soul made manifest. Chapter 940, Fractured Light. A shape emerged from the crater, then stood still, a prism-born creature cloaked in armor that devoured light and wept color. Lieutenant Dante's essence manifestation frame was humanoid only in silhouette, yet every contour of his form betrayed something beyond humanity. Jagged, overlapping plates curved along his body like the hide of a celestial leviathan, refracting light into a spectrum that danced violently with each breath he took. Where metal might have corroded or bone might have splintered, his armor shimmered like living crystal, impossibly sharp and endlessly shifting, a kaleidoscope trapped in predatory form. His back bore a crown of blades, spines of rainbow-touched glass jutting outward in asymmetrical brilliance, each one pulsing with a silent hum that resonated like a chord too deep for mortal ears. They flexed not with muscle but with pure intent, essence slick and coldly deliberate. His horns curved like antlers forged from split starlight, arching backward like the remnants of a forgotten constellation frozen mid-collapse. Between them, his face vanished beneath a mask of luminous porcelain. Faceless, featureless, yet somehow watching, judging, understanding all it surveyed. In one clawed hand, he gripped a blade that wasn't forged but distilled, a sword of absolute reflection. Its edge was silence itself. Its weight was consequence incarnate. It did not gleam with glory. It mirrored the viewer, revealing their true essence before it struck. Beneath the armor of refraction, shadows pulsed, thick and alive as ink in water. Legs terminated in talons that split the ground like prophecy made manifest, and a long tail coiled behind him like a serpent woven from refracted light and anchored wrath. As he slowly began to walk forward, crystals of mirrors bloomed with every footfall, petals of crystallized truth, fractals of reality fracturing in his wake. The world bent subtly around him, angles defying geometry, as if his mere presence rewrote the fundamental rules of existence. And he did not breathe. Instead, he released a geometry of strange rhythms, like a wound in reality that had forgotten whether it was divine or damned. Burning Storm stood speechless, his chest heaving with great displacements of air, eyes wide with recognition. Fractured Light, truly befitting of such a name. Lieutenant Dante rippled, like a broken glance curving and refracting different cadences of light. "Do not call my name," his voice echoed from all sides. Then reality failed to register his movement. One moment standing distant, the next hovering before Burning Storm's bestial body, leaving only a trail of crystalline mirrors in his wake. He moved his sword, and the world mirrored it, caught in the reflection of his wrath. Ryzel barely had time to react. The instant Dante's blade moved, space cracked. Not from pressure, but from rejection, as though reality itself recoiled from what he had become. Ryzel roared and hurled his massive forearms forward, flames spiraling off his fur like a sentient inferno seeking prey. His strike carved through stone and sky, but found only absence. Dante had already shifted again. Like light skipping across fractured glass, he materialized behind Ryzel, sword slashing in a low, merciless arc. The crystal blade scraped across the beast's molten hide, sparks erupting like furious stars as it collided with the momentum coating. It didn't pierce, but it rattled him to the core. Ryzel spun, his tail whipping around with devastating force, but Dante vaulted skyward, evading with a burst of mirrored steps, each footfall flashing like constellations shattering against night. He descended like divine judgment incarnate. His sword crashed onto Ryzel's shoulder, not with brute force, but with precision, sharp, layered strikes cascading one after another, each blow reverberating through the kaleidoscope of mirrors that bloomed around them like temporal echoes of the violence. First strike, a flash of crimson lightning. Second, a pulse of violet retribution. Third, Ryzel buckled, bones quaking beneath molten flesh. With a primal roar, he slammed both arms down into the earth. The ground surrendered, magma and pressure erupting outward in a chaotic maelstrom. Fire and smoke surged like a volcanic scream, devouring everything within reach. The shockwave flayed the land to ribbons. But Dante emerged from the inferno untouched, suspended upon a mirror that hovered midair, as though reality's covenant with gravity no longer applied to his existence. His voice rang out again, honeyed with false mercy. "You're burning too fast, Ryzel. You're fracturing yourself just to keep pace. Having come this far is testament enough. Why not surrender? Come to me. I can grant forgiveness. Together we could claim the whole of Central Plains." Ryzel's breath escaped his nostrils in scalding plumes. "Dante, shut the hell up and kill me." He charged, a meteor of fury and flame. Dante blinked out again, not teleportation, just movement beyond what Ryzel's combat-honed instincts could process. He materialized mid-charge, inverted in space, blade already singing its lethal arc, and slashed downward across Ryzel's face with surgical precision. The horn cracked, just slightly, but enough to ignite the beast's rage to new heights. Ryzel slammed into the crystal mirror beneath Dante's feet, shattering it with a sound like thunder consuming glass, but Dante had already dissolved into motion. He reappeared beside Ryzel's leg, blade flashing low and merciless. The blow struck true behind the knee, seeking weakness. This time blood. A spray of molten crimson arced through the air, sizzling as it bored smoking holes into the earth. Ryzel howled, a sound torn from the depths of primal rage. Enough! With that thunderous declaration, the flames along his spine erupted skyward, his essence manifestation surging to its terrible zenith. The air itself liquefied, space contorted. His bullish frame expanded, not dramatically, but perceptibly, swelling with raw, unchecked power. Muscles strained against burning hide, veins pulsating like rivers of captured sunlight. He slammed his forelimbs down, and the ground didn't merely break. It surrendered. A hemisphere of pure momentum detonated outward, a cataclysm of unrestrained kinetic fury. Caught Dante unprepared. For one perfect moment, Dante tumbled through the void, his prismatic form cartwheeling in magnificent disarray. The force had penetrated his defenses, his immaculate control fractured. Yet even in disorder he remained transcendent. His crystalline form splintered Ryzel's inferno into countless dancing motes of iridescent light. Dante arrested his chaotic flight mid-air, anchoring his foot against a mirror that materialized from nothingness. He launched forward, trailing luminous streaks like comets tearing across midnight skies. Ryzel didn't hesitate. He surged forward to meet his destiny. They collided at the epicenter of the devastated estate. The impact convulsed through the remaining city. The forest beyond the walls shuddered, ancient trees swayed like saplings, and even the imposing metallic ramparts of Fugal vibrated in sympathetic resonance. Dante's crystal sword clashed against Ryzel's incandescent charge. Neither yielded an inch. Power contested power. Light against fire. They remained locked in stalemate, trembling with cosmic exertion, faces mere breaths apart. Dante hissed, his voice like obsidian wind chimes. "This is the end, Ry. This is my final offer." Burning Storm's eyes glowed with an eerie, spectral luminescence, but the beast was flagging visibly. His physical form wavered subtly, the once voracious flames along his spine now diminished to flickering embers. His reservoir of essence had reached its absolute nadir, and worse still, Burning Storm was dying.